Right up. There you go.
Well, it's also.
Yeah, it's a little close. It's a little
why
close.
I'm not- Yeah, not.
So.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Really great to see everyone. Thank you for joining us here for day 2. This is day 2 of the Water Quality Coordinating Committee meeting. Again, this is a meeting of all the state and regional water boards members. It's actually enumerated in the water code, and really appreciate everyone's first day attendance. I thought yesterday was a number of great discussions. Really appreciative. This morning, I do have a few quick announcements before we get into our first item. Again, a reminder, this is a hybrid meeting, so we have about 43, 45 folks here in person, and then additional folks joining us online. It's also being webcast and live streamed. Quick review again, I think most of you know where the restrooms are, but they're around the corner as you go out to the left of the doors. In case of emergency, calmly fly out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Do observe the exits. Again, for any questions you may have, feel free to ask them at any time. There are QR codes on the tables in order to do so, and there's also a link that was emailed around for folks. And then lastly, if you have a chance, please do provide a suggested donation of about $10 to Meredith in order to help supplement the cost of today's snacks and food. All right, with that, thank you all again. Really appreciate everyone being here for the second day. We will try to end at about 1 o'clock. I know folks have flights trying to get out, so just appreciate that and a bit of housekeeping there. Our first item today is a session titled Tools and Approaches for Difficult Decision Making. And I'll give a few remarks here as introductory. I think I don't have to tell you all, but the work of the boards are incredibly consequential and oftentimes very difficult. We're trying our best to balance multiple needs and issues across stakeholders that often don't agree. And so we can be a forum for very contentious discussions. And we're certainly no stranger to that here at the State Water Resources Control Board and you all at the regional boards. But we thought it would be really helpful to have a session here where we talked about the difficult decision making that we're all involved in and some of the tools and approaches that can help bring consensus where consensus exists, but also come to conclusion on, again, difficult decisions that, as we know, aren't going to, there will be folks that aren't happy with the way a decision goes. But I think importantly, how we discuss the issue, how we approach the challenges and difficulties inherent in our decision making can make a huge difference in the way that folks feel welcomed to be part of that process. As we all know, it's incredibly important that we have all and as many voices as we can be part of our decision making so we can do the appropriate balancing, hear voices and opinions, but ultimately, again, may have to decide in a way that folks won't be happy with in the end. And so this session is meant to explore some of those past past cases of difficult decisions before the boards and some lessons learned. And importantly, there'll be space here for discussion. And so just with that, really appreciative. And I think I'll hand it off to Michael Lawford. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Joaquin, and thanks everybody for coming back today. I'm not sure if I get too much reverb, I may have to switch to a different mic, but the discussion I'm going to have is pretty lightweight and hitting the surface. I think many of you know, especially those that have, either led large organizations, gone through public policy programs, or participated in our training academy, know that there are treatises on the topic of difficult decision making. And we're just going to scratch the surface today. And part of what I'm going to do is set a little bit of the table. Some of it's going to build off what we discussed yesterday with board member expectations, because that is the incredibly important foundation for coming to and working our way through difficult decisions. And then I'm going to quickly hit a couple smorgasbords of items that will then be drawn upon, and you'll hear from our subject matter experts on the various difficult decisions that they've chosen for case models. So I'm not going to repeat everything we did, obviously, in the expectations discussion yesterday, but I want folks not only to think about what was in that document, but to think about the conversation that you all had, because there were a lot of really good ideas that were put out that really just underscored how you all approach problems and how important it is to have public decision making and why public boards have so much value. But I did want to underscore a few quickly. Preparedness, that is always going to help you working through a difficult decision. And if all the board members are equally prepared, it means that they can have a frank dialogue between all of them where there is common understanding of what's in the record, what you're debating, and what are really the issues before you. Asking the questions in advance to make sure you've got that preparedness. And if need be, if there are concerns you have, making sure the staff know in advance so that they can work through and be prepared to help you in that difficult decision, both procedurally, how it gets done, but also substantively bringing the right information to you in the right context for that decision. Fundamentally, respect for the public, but regardless of who they're representing, whether they're speaking for themselves, they're a highly paid advocate, consultant, attorney, whatever, or a community organizer. Respect for the staff. They bring a lot to the table, both technical expertise, but also knowledge of these programs. And our staff, my staff too, some have different strengths and weaknesses in this space. Some are terrific in the public engagement space in our staff, but all of them are bringing a wealth of experience to the table, and you should, respect that. And respect for your colleagues. Again, fundamental for decision making. One thing that we also underscored yesterday was we have to acknowledge there are lots of different voices, both in terms of the participants in the proceeding, but at the board, you're there for a reason, and you want to hear those voices out. And then throughout the process, listening with an open mind. It's easy to think when you read a cold record, the binders that come to you or the electronic compilation of PDFs, that what the real issues are and how it's going to be resolved. The staff have presented it up for you, but you've got to listen, come in with an open mind, because what you hear in those proceedings really can have a profound effect on how you work through that difficult decision. One other thing I want to emphasize with difficult decisions as we kind of move on here is they are actually, your boards, our boards, all of us make a lot of difficult decisions, but the ones we're talking about today really are the exception. You all work and your staff work functionally and make hundreds of board decisions each year that are oftentimes consent items or consensus items or move through relatively painlessly. But it's these difficult decisions that tend to get under our saddle and irritate. And so don't lose sight of the larger perspective of you're getting stuff done, you're working together functionally, your staff are working with stakeholders, and they're moving things through. I also don't think it's easy to lose sight of how much progress we've made in California over the decades that we've had Porter Cologne. Some of these decisions that we're facing right now are the culmination of decades of California growing, urbanizing, agriculture intensifying. The easy work, and it wasn't easy at the time, but in comparison, I think some of the easiest work has already been done. And we shouldn't lose sight of that context. I mean, what we are being presented with are new issues where we are chasing either new and novel molecules, new and novel biological problems that are a result of a changing climate, result of an urbanizing state. And so you shouldn't lose sight of and become despondent, if you will, about the challenges that come up in these difficult decisions, because somebody's made difficult decisions before, they've moved the ball forward, and they've left for you a particularly challenging issue to work through. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the incredible staff you have and recognized the work that they put into items. That's true for the consensus items and the items that move through smoothly. That's a reflection of sound staff work. But even when you get one of these difficult decisions, never view it as a failure of staff. They are doing their best to narrow issues. There is a lot of work that the boards have done and that we've done through the training academy to ensure that we have good public engagement leading up to these difficult decisions, and never lose sight of that. They're not just dropping a hard decision on you and walking away from it. They have already put a lot of work in and have tried to get it to a point where you can make an easy decision, and it simply isn't possible in all instances. These are really challenging issues that we're working through. Don't lose sight of the fact that the decisions have been vested in regional water boards for regional decision making to ensure that these difficult decisions are made by you as board members. You go through the appointments process where the governor talks, or the governor's office conveys to you how important it is that you make the decisions, you understand the decisions being made, you test staff. You're not there to just validate what they've said, but you need to be able to test them in the court of public opinion, if you will, through these public decision makings and through these difficult decisions that are made in public. You also hear that from the Senate Rules Committee. I mean, there's often a lot of concern, and I think for those of us that work on staff, we know that there's not staff capture of board members, but that tends to be a perception that pervades across the entire state for pretty much any public agency. We know that's not the case, but one of the things that you can do to help demonstrate that is be engaged at the board meetings, work through these difficult decisions, test the staff based on what you're hearing publicly. And we are never offended by that. None of your executive officers will be offended by that process, but it's a really important part of the board ultimately making good, sound, technical, legal, and public policy decisions. So as we now move to talking about the case studies you're going to hear about over the next hour or so, I wanted to try to pull together a lot of things that I think are important anytime we go into difficult decisions and lay out some general concepts for consideration. And I'm hopeful that during the discussion later, you all will add to this. I'm not trying to give you the entire universe, but when you're going into the decision, lean into that staff work. Like I said, they've already done a lot to move the ball forward. Ensure there has been broad public engagement early and throughout the process, especially when you know something's being teed up for a difficult decision, because the more that people are educated coming into your proceeding, that helps tremendously. Think about tools that are available before the decision to make the job easier for you either by narrowing the issues, allowing the members of the public and the stakeholders to have their say. So think about things like workshopping items in advance. Most of you do that for the most complex items, and sometimes you do it multiple times. But don't lose sight of the fact that's a crucial tool for you all to use. Bring all the preparation and expectations that we discussed in the expectation memos. Don't let parties frustrate you or distract you during the proceeding. Stay focused on working through the decision. I mean, some of us are highly paid to slow the process down and to distract. Focus on what are the critical decisions that you need to make, and don't get distracted. Don't follow the bait. We talked about it yesterday. Don't be afraid to have these difficult decisions in public. It's what Bagley-Keene was put there for. There is tremendous value for all of you engaging and not just kind of sitting back, and we don't have shrinking violets on the boards. But there is huge value for the public seeing you work through these problems. And I think a lot of people are used to having one-on-one conversations to try to resolve issues. And that's difficult to do when you've got plural bodies like this, and that's by design. Don't be afraid about having those conversations. Use your counsel to propose motions to help facilitate the discussion. This is also a really important tool that it allows individual board members to go on record on discrete issues. And even if ultimately the board doesn't accept the motion, it may give that board member confidence in voting for the final decision that at least their proposal or their modification to it was considered by the whole board, and an opportunity was made to push the ball a different direction and at least support perhaps a particular issue being advanced by a party. And one thing, we had a state board member who I won't name at one point in time who felt like if they made those kind of motions and the board didn't accept them, that meant they could never really vote for the ultimate motion that was before the board. And that should never be the attitude that you have going in. You have to ultimately, decide for yourself in the end whether you vote for the final motion. But just because you lose an intermediate motion and the board doesn't make an individual adjustment that you're interested in is not a reason not to vote. And in fact, it can be very valuable for you to come around ultimately to the end to support the board decision. Use and think about how you use time. Time can be an asset. It can help force a decision. And sometimes just, continuing the meeting that day and driving through while you've got everybody there can be really valuable to getting consensus across the board, or at least getting to a point where a majority of the board feels comfortable voting on something. But time can also be an asset in the flip way. If the board is uncomfortable with the decision, don't be afraid. Work with the executive officer and council in case there's some sort of deadline folks are under. But don't be afraid to continue an item so that you can focus the issues and give the parties a chance to come back to the board. Because often, the first time they get a sense of where individual board members are is at one of these public meetings. And if they realize that 3 or 4 of the board members have real concerns about something they're proposing with their project, whether it's a permitting project or a cleanup project, then that will require them potentially to reassess their position and bring something different to you when the item is heard again by the full board. Do not take anything personally that you hear from your colleagues or from the members of the public. Don't obviously make personal attacks, but don't ever take anything personally. People disagree all the time, and you all need to be able to function. And so just keep it professional, but also don't ever take it personally. Let what you say from the dais during the meeting be the extent of what you say about a board decision. And this is something culturally I think the boards have been really strong on. We're not political boards like a lot of, say, local elected bodies are. Board members don't have a constituency. You represent the entire region. And we've just had a culture that I think has been very strong, and it helps us work through difficult decisions, that once the decision is made, the board collectively supports that decision. And even if you're not happy with the ultimate outcome, we just have had a culture where there's not sniping going on afterwards, that a member didn't get what they want. And I think that's made our environment much more collegial for decision making and given people the space to feel comfortable about going firmly on record about a particular outcome. Don't take difficult, and this kind of is related to that, don't take those difficult decisions into the next item or into the next board meeting. That's not an excuse not to talk to the EO or talk to a colleague about a concern you had during a meeting, but don't let it interfere with how you're going to do your decision making as you move forward. There will be more difficult decisions to make in the future. And for that reason, I want to make sure that everyone always comes out of one of the difficult decisions prepared to learn from it. Learn what worked, learn what didn't work, iterate and apply that to the next difficult decision, because there will always be difficult decisions before the water boards. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Eric to talk about one from the state board.
Good morning. My name is Eric Oppenheimer. I'm the executive director for the State Water Board. I spend a lot of my time these days working with our staff to develop recommendations and options, and hopefully sound recommendations and options for our board to consider. Work with the staff to do our best to provide our board members as much thorough and objective information that we can to help them make some very challenging decisions. And I myself, throughout my career, I've had some really challenging assignments. But one thing that I've never done is to sit up on that dais and actually cast a vote for anything. And that's your challenge. And it's a big one, as the chair has talked about, and as Michael has talked about, it can be fraught. Oftentimes you're faced with these very controversial decisions that can frankly affect the lives and livelihoods of sometimes millions of people at great cost and also potentially great benefit. And it's really not an easy job. I recognize that I have a front row seat to these decisions, but like I said, I'm not the one who has to actually make them. So in a lot of ways, I feel like your job is much harder than our job as staff. And so I want to acknowledge that. Today, I'm going to talk about the Making Conservation a California Way of Life regulation that the board adopted. This was one such very difficult and challenging decision. And my talk today is not really intended to cover conservation. It's really to look at conservation as a case study and to focus on some of the tools and some of the approaches that we used as staff, and I think the board used as well, to navigate what was a challenging decision. Next slide, please. So while my talk is not about the details of conservation, there are certainly other people who can go into this topic at much greater depth and are much more knowledgeable on the details. This background, I think, is instructive. The conservation of a way of life legislation was comprised of two bills that were signed by Governor Brown in 2018. The bills are listed on the slide. Essentially, what it was a very complex set of bills. It was very prescriptive, and the reason it was complicated was because it really marked a pivot in state conservation policy. Prior to these bills and this legislation, conservation essentially was based on a % reduction across all water suppliers from an arbitrary baseline. And this was a pivot to a more budget-based approach that took into consideration local water supplier service areas, things like their population, their climate, their lot size, intended to be much more individualized and less generic than past efforts. But to do that, as we learn through the process, it requires a lot of technical complexity and policy complexity. The bills basically did a few things. Directed the Department of Water Resources to develop a set of detailed recommendations for the Water Board to consider. Didn't require the Water Board to adopt the department's recommendations, but did require us to consider those. It then required the Water Board to adopt a regulation that implemented the legislation. And lastly, it required urban water suppliers to report and comply with the regulation. Next slide, please. The regulation itself that the board adopted was comprised of these, what we called efficiency standards. And the way it works is we developed efficiency standards, and I have another slide, I'll go into a little bit more detail, but for things like indoor use and outdoor use, and the water suppliers are then required to develop water budgets that they have to comply with based on those efficiency standards. It also established performance measures that apply to commercial, institutional, and industrial users. And then, like I said earlier, it required the urban water suppliers to report and comply with these water budgets. Next slide, please. So this graphic here, sort of like an equation in graphic form, really is what I consider the corpus of the Making Conservation a Way of Life regulation. It requires the water suppliers to calculate what's called a water use objective, which is essentially another word for budget. Objective was the word in the legislation, and it's the word we use in the regulation as well. But that essentially is a budget. And this budget is comprised of a combination of variances. So these are basically special additional budgets for things that are unique to various water suppliers, things like water suppliers in the desert where there's a lot of water use associated with using swamp coolers, or service areas where maybe there's a heavier presence or prevalence of livestock, things like horses and llamas and things like that. To give you a sense of like the complexity of the regulation, it actually specifies that for a llama, the efficient use of water per day is 8 gallons. I mean, that's an example, but it's very detailed. The second piece, in addition to the variance, really is these water use budgets that are comprised of a residential indoor use budget. So this is a per capita number that applies to each person. It's the same across the state. It declines over time, however. That number was actually set in statute by the legislature, so we had no flexibility there. We just incorporated what the legislature adopted. Then it had a budget for water system losses, which was established through a previous regulation that the board adopted. And then there was a budget for outdoor residential water use, which the water board did set as part of the regulation. And that was honestly, I believe, one of the most contentious and debated parts of the regulation. And then there was also a budget for commercial, institutional, industrial customers or uses, landscapes that had dedicated irrigation meters. The third main component was what's called a bonus incentive, and essentially that is a credit for potable recycled water use. And so that was incorporated by the legislation as a way to incentivize recycled water, and specifically potable recycled water. You add up all those things and you get a customized water budget for each service area, for each supplier, that they calculate every year, and it's going to change every year because it's based again on climate, and they have to meet that number every year. The standards decline over time, so the budget gets increasingly more efficient over time, which means the budget gets smaller over time and therefore more challenging to meet, where eventually when we get to 2040, the budgets reach their most efficient levels. Next slide, please. So the regulation doesn't apply to any individuals. It applies to the state's 400 largest urban water suppliers. Urban water suppliers range in size from LADWP to very, not very small suppliers, but the smallest level would be a supplier who has 3,000 service connections or delivers more than 3,000 acre feet a year. So as you can see on the map, and the big circles represent large suppliers, the small circles represent smaller suppliers. As you can see on the map, it affected the entire state, and it affected water suppliers that provide about 95% of the state's water supply. Next slide, please. Okay, so in August 2003, we began our rulemaking process, and that's when we put out our draft of the regulation. I don't want to make it sound like, that was the beginning and there was no work before that. I have a subsequent slide where I'll talk about some of the public engagement. But we did a lot of work, pre-rulemaking work, both the Water Board and the Department of Water Resources. But we officially began the rulemaking process in August 2003. That starts a clock of 1 year in which you have to complete the rulemaking process. And if you don't complete it, there's essentially a reset and you have to start over. And so a year, as I learned, is not a whole lot of time to get across the finish line on a regulation like this. So the regulation goes out, we start our rulemaking process, and I'll just say, the level of pushback and controversy was quite high. I mean, that's an understatement. There was a tremendous amount of concern that was raised both by water suppliers and I'd say to a lesser extent by the conservation community. Urban water suppliers saying that the regulation was way too stringent, that it was impossible to meet, it was infeasible, the costs were astronomical, and then the conservation community saying we weren't going far enough. But to be clear, the bulk of the comments were from water suppliers, and it wasn't just water suppliers. We got a lot of critique from academia. We got critique from independent groups like PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California. A lot of media coverage, a lot of negative media coverage. And then lastly, the Bipartisan Legislative Analyst's Office put out a report that also was frankly highly critical of the proposed regulation at that time. Again, too stringent, we're going too far. And so it was October of that year, we had a workshop during our comment period, and it was a 12-hour workshop. on this topic alone. And it was, a very organized water supply community coming in and making very frankly compelling comments to our board about how this regulation was infeasible. And so just a lot of pushback. And at that point, I think rightly, it gave our board pause. It gave me pause, frankly, questioning, were we on the right track here? And so the board looked back on a process that they had used for the wetlands policy, where they had the staff work closely with the stakeholders through a series of work groups and asked us to pursue something similar, which I'll talk about. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? So basically, how did we deal with this? To me, there was like three main ingredients. One was staffing, two was engaging, and three was adapting. So on the staffing front, we had a highly trained, skilled, dedicated group of engineers, scientists, and attorneys that were very passionate and worked very hard. A lot of them worked nights, worked weekends, skipped vacations, not because we told them to, not because we asked them to, because they wanted to. They were dedicated to getting this done, and they had the skills to do it. The second element was engaging. Like I said, the board directed us essentially to do a lot more engagement and reach out and talk to the critics. And then the third piece was adapting. Once we engaged with stakeholders, we made changes to the regulation just to demonstrate that we had heard them and we understood their concerns and increased the flexibility. And basically those changes were in the form of not really reducing the stringency of the regulation, but giving more time and creating alternative compliance pathways. Those were the two main things that we did. And that helped immensely, the time element and also providing these other ways to comply. But to me, I think there's these three ingredients, and really the secret sauce was the engaging element. That is where the sort of tide shifted and the momentum started moving, more in favor of progress, I would say. So let's go to the next slide, where I want to focus a little bit on the engagement part. So there's a table here, and it's helpful because it breaks out like all of the workshops and staff meetings and one-on-one meetings that both the Department of Water Resources did and the State Water Board did before the rulemaking. Again, I just wanted to be clear. It's not like we dropped the rule out and we hadn't done any pre-work. We had done a lot during the rulemaking and then after the rulemaking. I don't need to talk about those, but what I do want to talk about is this work group process, because this is what I feel really went a long way. After the workshop, again, the board directed us to do this more engagement. So what we did was we created this work group process where we pulled together it was November and December of 2023. So this was the holiday period. We held over 20 multiple hour work group meetings that we scheduled during this 2-month period. And the way we set it up was we invited what we considered to be thought leaders from the water conservation community, both from the water supply perspective and the environmental perspective. And at our first meeting, we put together a list of all of the concerns that we thought we heard, and we talked to them about them. We asked them, are these the right things? Is there anything you want to add? Went through that process, and then we divided the concerns up into a series of 4 or 5 different sub work groups. And then, like I said, held these 20 meetings over the holiday period, brought people together and made sure first we understood the concerns. And there were really 2 camps that there were 2 issues that kind of came about. One was where it wasn't that we were in a disagreement on the concept of what we were trying to do. It was that the language we were using caused concern for people, and by modifying the language, we can address the concern. And those were the easy things to work out. But then there really were substantive differences that it was clear staff had a perspective, water suppliers had a perspective, and the environmental community had a perspective. And when we could come to consensus, that was great. But more often than not, we couldn't. And so all we did then was make sure we understood people's perspective, repeat it back to them, and document it. And we went through that process over the 2 months. And that's really when I felt like there was sort of a change in attitude from the people who were critical. They were still concerned that we had a regulation that from their perspective was problematic, but they clearly felt like we were listening to them and understanding their concerns, and that they felt like we would, make adjustments based on those concerns. Let's go to the next slide. So the other communication that was really important was our internal communication. We did a lot of staff, outreach. We talked to different divisions, different organizations, got their input, but most importantly, what we did was set up a series of detailed briefings for our board members, where we listed each issue that we identified as a concern from one stakeholder or another, that where there was consensus, we had a recommendation, and generally our board likes consensus. And if everyone agrees, we tend to go with that recommendation. But more often than not, there were areas where there were divergent viewpoints. And all we did there was document, water supplier perspective, conservation group perspective, a recommendation, and options. And we methodically went through in a series of, I don't know how many it was, but it was multiple briefings, got our board members' perspective, and then used the totality of the input that we got from our board and from the stakeholders and made these adjustments to the regulation that I talked about earlier, which was mainly more time and alternative compliance pathway. There were many, many more changes, but those were the big ones. Let's go to the next slide. We put out the regulation, the revised regulation, and I don't want to say everybody was happy. There was definitely concern that we loosened things up too much from the environmental community. In fact, there was one quote that I remember from one of the environmental group leaders that said, the name of this regulation should be changed to Waiting for Conservation as a California Way of Life, which, to my chagrin, I have to admit that was a clever line for a newspaper article. But up here, I have a quote from PPIC, Ellen Hannock, who was at PPIC at the time, well-respected, person in the water community from a well-respected entity, put out an editorial essentially recognizing that the water board had listened to the concerns and made changes. And, the quote here, the state water board has made some practical adjustments that will give more flexibility to water agencies responsible for making tough decisions. We commend the board for this, and we hope that it stays its course. I mean, that was a pretty interesting quote. I've never really seen anything like that for a regulatory agency. So I was impressed that they also could recognize that the board had adjusted. And so next slide. In July of 2024, on what was, I recall, a really scorching hot day, the board we brought this item for consideration from the board, and we were able to, it wasn't completely, harmonious, but we were able to bring the temperature down a lot and enable the board to make a decision, and they adopted the regulation. And that's not the end of the story. We're implementing it now. We still have a team of people working on it. But this process of these work group meetings combined with very focused board discussions is really what got us through, and what for this process really helped us through what was a very difficult decision. And I think that's my last slide. You can complete, you can hit the next one. Yes. If you want more information, you can go to our website. I'll just close by saying I feel really fortunate to have worked on this project, to have worked with our staff, who again were very talented, very passionate, to have worked with the board, to work with all the stakeholders. I mean, I really view this as one of the highlights of my career. It is something that does change state conservation policy. We have forecasted that by 2040, it will save about 400,000 acre feet of water, which is pretty substantial. People can argue that 2040, well, that's, 15 years away. But the way I look at it, if you were to, try to build a reservoir today, I think it would probably take longer than that. And so I view this as a big success story, and again, feel very fortunate.
Great. Good morning, and I'm going to share a case study from the San Francisco Bay Water Board, and ironically, it's from our July 2024 board meeting. So I didn't realize we were both doing things in parallel. Next slide, please. And next, please. Perfect. So I'm excited to share with you our journey for nutrient management and the challenges faced as we brought a significant regulatory action before our board last summer. I'm grateful for yesterday's nutrient presentations because they provided good background for understanding the issues before the San Francisco Bay Water Board. I want to give you a little history. We embarked on our nutrient management initiative in 2010 in response to a call of action by the US EPA and State Water Board to address nutrient enrichment in state waters. In our case, the San Francisco Bay Estuary, and it coincided with findings by the USGS scientists that the bay's longstanding resilience to nutrients may be waning. This led to the development of a locally supported, multi-interested, long-term strategy led by the San Francisco Estuary Institute in conjunction with USGS. Next slide, please. So the decision before our board on July 10th of last year was, should the San Francisco Bay Water Board adopt nutrient limits for the wastewater agencies that discharge to San Francisco Bay? This was a very consequential decision for the board, and I'll explain why. Permits are updated every 5 years, and in 2022, several issues added to the visibility, our sense of urgency, and the extensive engagement of our stakeholders with competing objectives. First, I'm going to cover a little background so you understand the science. The parties involved, we did extensive engagement. We never did as much engagement with any other MPDS permit as we did with this one, and it paid off. And then I'm going to talk about the challenges surrounding the decision the board had to make and how we managed the process and how we got to resolution. Next slide, please. So for background, most of the nitrogen load coming into San Francisco Bay comes from the municipal wastewater treatment plants that we refer to as POTWs. These 40 plants, so 40 different dischargers with 40 different opinions, collectively discharge about 500 million gallons of treated wastewater to the bay and its tributaries every day. In this map, the light orange line shows the boundary of our region, and the black dots show the roughly 42 wastewater treatment plant discharge outfalls. Next slide, please. So historically, nutrients had not been a problem for San Francisco Bay, and that's because the growth of algae in the bay had been impeded by suspended sediment, which limits light penetration, strong tidal mixin, which limits periods of stratification, and filter feeding clams, which eat up the algae and keep their population low. But as I mentioned, around 2010, there were some clues that the Bay Area's resilience against high nutrient loads in the bay may be waning. Next slide, please. Well, because of these growing concerns, the San Francisco Bay issued their first nutrient permit in 2014. This did not call for any load limits, but instead focused on let's better understand. We worked with the 40 wastewater agencies and said, let's let the science inform the regulations. And so we required the 40 wastewater agencies to monitor their effluent monitoring to the bay, to know what their discharge of nutrients was. We required them to do a regional study for each of them to evaluate the options for them to reduce nutrients. And we required the 40 wastewater agencies to collectively contribute $880,000 per year over the 5-year term of the permit towards nutrient monitoring, modeling, and science studies. Then the second permit that the Water Board issued in 2019 also did not limit nitrogen loads in the bay. However, it did forecast the need to cap nutrient loads with a 2024 permit. The 2019 permit, next please, continued the effluent monitoring that we required by the wastewater agencies. We required them to report yearly their nutrient loads. We required a study by each of the wastewater agencies to look, the first permit, they looked at the conventional treatment options to reduce nutrient. Now we said, we want you to look at multi-benefit solutions. Look at what you can do if you were doing water recycling and reducing nutrients, or implementing other nature-based solutions such as horizontal levees. So really the purpose of these first two nutrient permits was really to focus on better understanding the science, looking at what it would cost if they had to reduce nutrients. And in this second permit, we increased the funding. We required the wastewater agencies to collectively contribute $2.2 million per year to the monitoring of San Francisco Bay for nutrients, the scientific studies, and the modeling. So that was the second permit. Next slide, please. So things changed significantly in the summer of 2022 when the conditions that typically limit algae growth in the San Francisco Bay were no longer present. That year, there was a significant harmful algae bloom of the species Heterosigma acashmo. The bloom formed in a channel between Oakland and Alameda and spread to the South Bay, consuming all the nitrogen in the water, resulting in extremely low dissolved oxygen levels over a large area, leading to hundreds of thousands of dead fish throughout San Francisco Bay. These photos show the harmful algae bloom spreading the Bay Bridge and some of the thousands of fish that died in Oakland's Lake Merritt because of this bloom. You can imagine how the public reacted to the massive fish kills. Sacramento had to respond to calls from the LA Times. It was in the New York Times. It made national news. Next slide, please. It's important to note that nitrogen levels are high throughout the bay, making it susceptible to significant blooms. In 2023, there was another Heterosigma acashmo bloom. This time it was in the North Bay. While it was not as severe as the 2022 bloom, it did result in observed fish mortality, including dead sturgeon. Next slide, please. Because of the large algae blooms that occurred in 2022 and 2023, we made findings in the permit that there is a reasonable potential that the wastewater treatment plants that discharge nitrogen at levels that could cause or contribute to an exceedance of the basin plant's narrative biostimulatory substances objective during the dry season. When such reasonable potential exists, federal regulations require that the permit include effluent limits that are protective of water quality. To develop numeric limits, we translated the narrative biostimulatory substances objective by using a calculated criteria for dissolved oxygen and supplemental information. Next slide, please. Now I want to take a minute to explain how we establish our quantitative relationship between wastewater nitrogen loads and dissolved oxygen levels in San Francisco Bay, then how we use this relationship to determine the load reductions necessary to achieve the narrative objective. This detail is an important part of the decision criteria we ask the board to evaluate and that we explain to our stakeholders. So the 2022 phytoplankton bloom is our critical condition for our calculations to establish the relationship. This means that the bloom represents a set of circumstances in which beneficial uses were harmed and therefore provides the framework for us to evaluate how to reduce the impact. There are three main characters we're going to be talking about to make sure that you understand how we translated this. So nitrogen is represented by the big red N on the screen. Oxygen is represented by the big blue O, and Heterosigma acashmo, the phytoplankton that blossomed during the bloom, is represented by this graphic. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing on the screen is an idealized cross-section view of a portion of San Francisco Bay with the water column in blue and sediments at the bottom in brown. It's like you're scuba diving and you're looking through the water horizontally. At the start of the 2022 bloom, there was plentiful nitrogen in the water and more than enough oxygen to support aquatic life. But there was some heterosigma cashmere lurking out there, as is common in the bay. Much of the time, phytoplankton do not grow out of control despite the plentiful nitrogen. This is because the phytoplankton cannot grow fast enough to make use of all that nitrogen because San Francisco Bay turbidity limits available light. And zooplankton and bivalve grazing keep algae abundance under control. Next slide, please. But in the summer of 2022, conditions turned out to be just right for the harmful species to grow very rapidly and use up all the nitrogen in the water and achieve a huge abundance. A couple of points to make here. Nitrogen in the bay was drawn down to a concentration where we could not really detect it. Basically, the heterosigma cashmere were at a buffet, and they were eating up all the nutrients, and they were growing and propagating throughout the bay until there was no more nitrogen. So second point, because of the chlorophyll measurements, the amount of nitrogen algae produced was comparable to that amount expected if all the available nitrogen fueled the algae growth. Both of these points are important for our calculation approach. Next slide, please. So what happens next is when the bloom ended or crashed, all that phytoplankton died pretty rapidly and much of it sank to the bottom. Next slide, please. And when the dead phytoplankton was digested by the bacteria, oxygen in the water was consumed so that at least temporarily, the low oxygen concentration harmed aquatic life, resulting in massive fish kills throughout San Francisco Bay, and as you saw the photo in Lake Merritt. I've run around Lake Merritt for over 20 years, several times a week. I didn't even know there was that many fish in the lake. It was shocking. The entire surface was covered with dead fish, all different species. Another important piece of information we got from the data collected during the bloom crash was that the amount of oxygen consumed matches what one would expect to be consumed based on the amount of phytoplankton in the water prior to the crash. Next slide, please. So our strategy is to reduce nitrogen loads to limit the nitrogen available for algae growth for a severe bloom like 2022. We don't want them having that buffet anymore and allowing the propagation. They can't control themselves because they just eat it all up. So if there's going to be a bloom, the reduced nitrogen would mean less algae produced and more oxygen left after the algae are digested. Next. The first question we needed to answer was, how much oxygen is enough to protect beneficial uses such that we can meet the narrative objective? Next slide, please. So we found the wastewater load reductions of 40%, advance please, from the 2022 baseline would reduce the nitrogen in the bay enough such that, advance please, even if all the nitrogen was completely converted into phytoplankton during a severe bloom event like 2022, and then all the phytoplankton was digested by the bacteria, enough oxygen would remain in the bay to protect beneficial uses. Next slide, please. Now what I want to do is switch gears and describe how we translated these model projections into effluent limits. So in 2022, wastewater loads were about 44,000 kilograms per day of nitrogen in the bay. So to achieve a 40% reduction that's necessary to protect beneficial uses, nitrogen loads would need to be reduced by about 26,700 kilograms per day. Next, please. So the permit took a bay-wide approach to final compliance because the entire bay has high nitrogen loads and is vulnerable to nutrient enrichment. So if the bay-wide or aggregate load limit is met, each discharger is considered in compliance. If it's not met, then dischargers that don't meet their individual limits are in violation. We worked extensively with the stakeholders. And when I say extensively, we met individually with each of the 40 dischargers, and we met with them as a group. We met with Baykeeper. We met with Sierra Club. We met with EPA. Finally, I'm like, how do you thread this needle? They all have different opinions, Baykeeper, Sierra Club, why don't you reduce nutrients by 70%? Some dischargers were on board with 40%. Some said no. So we brought them all in the same room. It's like bringing my 3 sons in the same room. We're going to work it out. So we brought them all in the same room and let them all hear each other's opinions and kind of weaved, kind of like threading the needle and like what's reasonable and what's the science saying. We walked them through. We explained it. We made sure we could explain the science. Different people have different knowledge of the science. So part of it is we had to make sure we could explain the science so that everyone understood where we were coming from. All those in the Bay Area saw the harmful algal bloom in 2022. And when that occurred in August 2022, I told the dischargers at that time, that's a game changer. So everything we've been doing up to now, let's study it. Let's kick the can down the road. It's no more kicking the can down the road. So I'd say we had very honest discussions. We had open discussions. Everything that you said with regard to the board, and we'll get to the board shortly, we were doing that with our stakeholders. Extensive outreach. So when it came time for us to talk about this in the new permit limits, most were on board, even though, as I said, some of the NGOs would have preferred we reduce to 70%, but we felt like the science supported 40% at this time. So then the big challenge was the 10-year compliance schedule. And they said, we want more time. And so what I had explained to them is, per the state board compliance schedule policy, we're all one water boards, the maximum time we can allow it is 10 years. But we recognize for multi-benefit solutions such as water recycling or horizontal levees, they do take longer. And so we said, we will see what we can do to get you more time. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So now that I've covered how we developed the nitrogen limits, I just want to briefly summarize the third permit. Like the first 2 permits, it required monitoring reporting. They had to continue to fund the science program at a tune of $2.2 million per year. And I want to acknowledge now, when we took the permit to our board in July of 2024, we had been working for 10 years under a permit with the wastewater agencies in the Bay Area. And I want to acknowledge that they had contributed at that point $15 million to the monitoring and the studies to make sure we had good understanding to inform the regulations. And with this new permit, they're committing to continue to fund $2.2 million per year of the studies. We have interim and final limits, and basically we've asked them to work together in regionally planning their upgrades. And then I'll talk more about the 10 years in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So this has really been a stakeholder-driven process, and you've got the regulators who want to do the right thing and inform the science. You've got the scientists who, some of these PhDs, no offense to any PhDs in the room, but can get really into the science and have to make sure we see the forest through the trees, and we have to take the science and interpret it and make policy decisions, bring those to our board. That's our job. And then you've got the enviros who they really want to protect the bay. They're not as concerned about the money. Then you got the POTWs, the wastewater agencies, they've got rising costs. They have aging infrastructure. They've got increasing chemical costs. And this was before the tariffs. They've got increasing energy costs. Their costs are going up. They've got to balance their rate increases. So they want to do the right thing, but cost is a big deal. So we had to take that into consideration. But I think one of the things we've done throughout this process is we've been open, we've been transparent, and we have done joint fact-finding with the science. And we have a robust science program. And we took the harmful algal bloom of 2022, the other one in 2023, and we used those as opportunities to learn together. And as we learned the science, we shared it with the NGOs. We shared it with the wastewater agencies. Nobody could deny the science. Nobody could deny the photos of the dead sturgeon, the massive fish kills. So we've been very lucky to be working collaboratively on joint fact-finding of the science. Next slide, please. So this is once again just talking about our watershed approach and recognizing that we've been working for many years, kind of like Eric, you talked about water conservation regs. It didn't happen overnight. The working with the stakeholders doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to develop that trust. And now that you got the trust, You don't want to violate that trust. And when I talk about the compliance schedule policy, I want to give credit to our board and the state board and Michael and Eric as they've worked with me on this compliance schedule policy as we work to continue our trust with our stakeholders. So basically, we've been, next please, working collaboratively with our stakeholders, and I can't understate having a strong collaborative science program made our ability to bring a decision to our board much better and much easier, because it wasn't just the water board doing the science in a vacuum. We had been doing it collaboratively. USGS was at the table. EPA was at the table. Central Valley Region's at the table. We have the wastewater agencies, the Bay Area Clean Water agencies are at the table. So that was really great. Next, please. And then next, so it's based on the sound science. And at the end of the day, what we've always said to the wastewater utility, we want our regulations to be based on sound science, and we want to recognize that they have other competing priorities, but we have to do the right thing if the science says this is what we have to do. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly go over the comments before I get to how the board dealt with this. So general comments. EPA supported the draft permit. Baykeeper and Sierra Club, there were 600 plus letters in support, but they originally wanted us to go to 70%. There was meetings I had with the head of Baykeeper and kind of explained, we have to do what the science supports at this time. Later, it may support others. In general, with 40 dischargers, there's 40 different opinions. Most of them were supportive of the permit, but they were concerned about the cost, they were concerned about the timeline, and there was one particular outlier who chartered a bus and did an extensive public outreach. They had their public information officer go out to the senior community out there, to the various cities, and lined up city managers and all their staff, but we knew this was happening, so we prepared. And told my board to prepare that this big, beautiful charter bus was parked outside our board meeting while the board meeting was going on. As soon as the board voted, all these people walked out of the board meeting. So there was one outlier of the wastewater utility that really tried to make an influence on our board. Next slide, please. So the comment about granting longer than 10 years for multi-benefit or innovative solutions, we heard that clearly from our stakeholders. We heard that. And I know I ran a large wastewater agency. I was responsible for not only the operations and maintenance, but the capital improvement program. I know how long it takes to do these projects. So we worked with our board and we developed a resolution. Instead of just saying, we developed a resolution that we took to the board on July 10th when we took the permit that directed staff to explore options to allow more time than the 10 years that's the maximum allowed by the state board compliance schedule policy. When we told the stakeholders we were doing that, it was like, whoa. They were like, that was really made them feel heard, and we were true to it. I'm telling my board to direct me to do this. I mean, that's pretty, listening to them. So they were really feeling good about that, but then I have to make good on it too. And then the next slide was a comment about $11 billion. So that was brought up by numerous stakeholders. We had over 50 public speakers. I'm going to talk about the board meeting and how our board handled that in a minute. But this was a big comment was it's going to cost over $11 billion for the region. This is going to be expensive already. We have a big homeless issue in the Bay Area. There's already affordability issue. So there was a lot of talk about the cost, but also the Clean Water Act requires the permit to include requirements because we had found reasonable potential and we have to be protective of beneficial use. Next slide. So what the board had to consider that day was, are they going to adopt a permit that could cost potentially up to $11 billion? And having been involved in the cost quotes, there was big contingency I had the consultant add back when that cost study was done because costs increased significantly. So whether it's really $11 billion, $10 billion, it's expensive. But what the board had to consider, the cost of not taking action that day is also very significant. So they were faced with a very difficult decision. And we heard from the sport fishing community. We heard from the commercial fishing industry. the cost of tourism in the Bay Area. No one wants to come to San Francisco Bay and see a bunch of dead fish, smelly fish. No one wants to eat at a restaurant along the bay and seeing dead fish. There's a nice restaurant at Lake Merritt. It had to close when the lake was full of dead fish. It stunk. Suddenly people weren't walking around the lake and I was running faster than normal. I was doing my inspections to report back, but it was still lots of dead fish until the birds came and had a feast. So what the board had to consider was the cost of acting and the cost of not acting. Next slide, please. So I kind of want to summarize briefly the board considerations that day. They had to consider the science, the joint fact-finding of the science that showed San Francisco Bay had lost its resilience. They had to look at the science that, we had worked collaboratively with SFEI, USGS, with the Bakwa community, EPA, that really showed the minimum. So we were asking for the minimum is a 40% to protect beneficial uses. The cost is going to be significant, but not acting also is very expensive. And then the multi-benefit solutions need more time. So next slide. And before I heard Michael's comments yesterday about boards and boards acting, here's a photo of our board, is everything Michael said. As I said, I have a great board. And so what did our board do? Well, our board read all the materials. They had been briefed on it. So they had been briefed on this. One, they'd been briefed on the harmful algae bloom. And as we developed the science, they were briefed on it. Our board is very engaged. They ask questions. They want to make sure they understand. They all come from different backgrounds. We have attorneys on our board. We have scientists on our board. We have people with regulatory background. They all bring their unique perspective to the board and ask these really good questions of our team. So one is the board was very well informed. They read the board package. They had been educated on the science. They had been educated on the commenter concerns. They knew this was going to be a significant consequential decision, but no decision was also a decision. They also knew that we had reached out to as many stakeholders as possible for many months. And when I say many months, for 2 years prior to this permit adoption. And we had been listening to them. We encouraged comments in writing and during the board meeting. Our board stressed mutual respect for all parties and their particular agendas that day. Our board chair, I told her we had over 40 registered participants. I said, normally in a case like that, a lot of times board chairs decide to limit them to 2 minutes. Nope, we're going to give everybody their 3 minutes as long as it takes. And our board listened that day. Our board meeting went late that day, but every speaker got their time. Our board engaged with speakers. They wanted to understand. So they came from a place of understanding. They were open-minded. They wanted to hear. They wanted to understand the person from Rossmore, the senior citizen, and what it meant to them. They wanted to understand from the city manager. They wanted to hear from the person who spoke from the commercial fishing industry, from the professor from UC Berkeley Department of Public Health, advocating for the permit, the scientists advocating for the permit, then the different people who had been poised up by a particular wastewater agency to speak out against it. They listened with an open mind. They were active listeners. And at the end of the day, I think they made the right decision. They voted unanimously to approve the permit. But they did this, I think they were very well informed. They had to balance all the information. And I felt like they came into that board meeting prepared knowing the science, prepared knowing the key comments, but really wanting to listen to the speakers that day. Since the pandemic, I think it was the most crowded the board meeting ever was. It was a packed board meeting. And I just want to say thank you to my board. I'm very fortunate to have a board who really does everything Michael says. They come prepared. They're not afraid to ask questions. They're not afraid to ask questions of the public speakers, to seek understanding, to make sure that each speaker is heard and that they understand what they want to represent. So next slide. So I'm wrapping up. We're going to continue to work with our stakeholders for practical regulation. As you heard yesterday, harmful algae blooms are going to continue to come. The climate's getting warmer. We do know that nutrients fuels that harmful algal bloom. We want to advance the science still for San Francisco Bay. We are not done. So we want to continue to work with our community, work with the stakeholders, so that when we bring something to our board, it's based on sound science, based on collaborative fact finding with our stakeholders, and so that our board can make informed decisions. And just want to say thank you. Thank you to my wonderful board. And next slide is just any questions, but we're on to the next speakers.
All right, good morning. So my name's Yvonne West. I'm the director of the Office of Enforcement. If you're not familiar with our office, we have both technical and legal staff. We support all 9 regional boards in pursuing enforcement actions, as well as state board, before the state board and state board program areas. We really do work with the best board. And I'm here today with Christina Shoup, and let her introduce herself. Oh, uh-oh.
Switch it out with other.
You have the magic touch. Well, with that, I'm Christina Shoup. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the Central Valley Region 5, working out of our Fresno office. And I joined the regional board about 2 years ago, so some of this case predates me, but not all of it.
All right, so this case example that we're presenting is an enforcement case example, and it's on a little bit of a different scale than the last 2 you heard. Like most enforcement, it's against an individual entity. And even though it is a different scale, I would argue equally important and sometimes equally as hard to make those kinds of decisions when you know exactly who it's impacting. So we're presenting to you today an enforcement case study involving a cease and desist order issued to the city of Arvin back in 2023 concerning the operation of their wastewater treatment facility. So this city of Arvin this is going to be relatable, I think, to all the regions, because I think you all have this situation in your region. It's in Kern County. It's a small city, 15 miles southeast of Bakersfield. It has a population of approximately 20,000 residents, and it is a disadvantaged community. Next slide, please. Their wastewater treatment facility is regulated by Region 5 under a WDR, waste discharge requirements, and they treat wastewater and store it in unlined ponds prior to discharging to land application areas. Next slide. So this event, what led up to this event started actually, like most enforcement cases, several years before. So in 2021, the city called up the regional board and let them know that they self-reported their non-compliance with the WDRs. The city engineer let them know that they were having issues with one of their ponds, specifically Pond 3. And it was constructed largely above grade, and they were having seepage issues. Staff immediately inspected in 2021. They noted the seepage. That's what this picture is. And based on observations, they came to the conclusion that of course this facility was having significant issues. They started meeting with the city monthly, and that continued throughout the course of what we're going to talk about, this background leading up to the cease and desist order being brought in 2023. If you go ahead and go to the next slide. Really what triggered it is in 2023, regional board staff went back out to the facility. They conducted additional inspections. They noted that the city was applying unauthorized land application areas, using them at non-ergonomic rates. And they were still using Pond 3, even though it was in disrepair and having issues. Ultimately, what regional board staff concluded was that the city did not have adequate storage and disposal capacity to manage their current wastewater stream, and that restricting connections was going to be necessary, wastewater connections, to make sure that the city could make the required repairs, which were going to have to occur over a number of years, and return to compliance with the WDRs, or I should say, acquire a new permit or an amended permit, as well as additional land application areas. So staff prepared a cease and desist order based on the city's waste WDR violations going back to 2021 and through the course of this time, and brought it before their board. And so what was the regional board staff's perspective, and I'll stop in case you want to add to this, was that they were generally concerned about not only the pond seepage and the wastewater that was coming out of the pond that was near a road site. There were land application areas and kind of default ponds being created with some bermed areas that the city were using, and public access to those areas without signage. There was a number of issues going on, but ultimately it was just the long-term sustainability. Continued growth and construction in the area was only going to increase demand on this already dysfunctional system, and they needed to find a way to get it back into compliance.
Yeah, and I would say that subsequent to issuing NOVs in 2021 and 2022, subsequent investigations, what was really a major concern was that we were seeing multiple emergency discharges to unpermitted areas that were leading to impingement on public access areas and recreational areas. And so when you've got an inspector who's out on site and they see wastewater right next to people swimming in a stormwater pond, that's extremely concerning.
Yeah. So we had a lot of concerns from the regional board side. It was not a good situation, and it's a difficult situation. So we look at, on the other side, on the stakeholder side, this went to a contested hearing. The city didn't agree to the cease and desist order. It wasn't a mutually agreed upon solution. Instead, they went to a hearing before the board. It was a contested cease and desist order. Stakeholders such as the city, and we had a U.S. representative also who put in comment letters. And basically their primary concern was that the sewer connection ban that was in the cease and desist order would stop economic growth and prohibit them from coming into compliance because their income flow would be impacted. It would not allow them to proceed with already planned development. And there was just really a lot of concern about this order. Again, this was already a collaborative relationship. Enforcement staff had been working for years with the city, trying to get them where they needed to be, to make the upgrades they needed to make in order to have this facility compliant again. Next slide. So we've got the challenges on both sides. At a contested hearing, we have the city arguing that they are working on coming in compliance. They've submitted a number of technical reports that staff looked very closely at and found that they were insufficient for a number of reasons. We had a small disadvantaged community with limited financial resources. And so this was not an easy decision for the board to make. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on the challenges.
I would just say that, one of the key challenges with any disadvantaged community is always going to be money. And what we see a lot of times with disadvantaged communities is that they rely on contractors to provide them with their technical support. Mm-hmm. And this process has really allowed us to be a bolster to that and to give them a second perspective.
Yeah, so the decision, next slide, please. The board ultimately did decide to adopt the cease and desist order and support staff's recommendations. The CDO, as it was drafted and it first came to the board, had already taken into account some of these concerns and considerations in the way that the connection restriction was drafted. It wasn't just a straight up ban. It prohibited future connections that were not where future development did not yet have a building permit as of the date of the cease and desist order. There were exemptions for projects that would alleviate extreme public hardship or public health problems. And then there was a provision, I think it was originally drafted for the board, but then at the hearing, there was some additional discussion and they changed it to allow for the executive officer to grant additional exemptions to the connection restriction based on specific findings. And I'll talk about those probably a little bit later. And this ban is to remain in effect until it's removed by the board. So it was a hard decision to make. The board made it. I can't speak from the board's perspective. But I'm going to talk about, maybe next slide, some tools and strategies that helped get there, I think helped get there. So one, we have an enforcement order that is acknowledging some of the concerns and offering some creative solutions. It's drafted in a way, the connection ban, that it wasn't just a blanket ban. It had some room to adapt over time. It allowed for some additional exemptions where necessary, based on specific findings. And some of those specific findings that I thought were kind of important is that the city had to demonstrate that they had taken actions and they had the means to complete corrective actions necessary, that they were on the path to compliance, and that granting those additional exemptions wasn't gonna prohibit them from getting there. It invested authority in the executive officer to grant those conditional and make those findings and grant those additional exemptions at a time in the future when the facts would be better known about what exactly was at stake, and could weigh those risks and benefits. And I also look at like what the city had done in the interim. Then also, I think there was a clear connection here. There was a clear connection between the remedy and the concern, the water quality concerns at stake and the remedy being sought. It was because those future connections would exacerbate the concerns and exacerbate the water quality issues, for which the order was being brought in the first place. Do you have anything to?
And I don't want to preempt the outcome, but I have to say the board engagement on this particular CDO was particularly powerful, because when you're talking about a disadvantaged community, there are a lot of emotions involved. And as board members, you have to balance our responsibilities as you sit in that seat with the needs of the community that you're regulating. And so I want to say that the practical perspective that the board members brought to this decision was incredibly powerful. It allowed for us to add in those exceptions that acknowledged that the city was still going through growing pains, and that additional progress could still be made towards their financial goals while still maintaining our water quality needs.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about lessons learned in the next slide, but I do want to say that this isn't unique in the sense that enforcement in this instance wasn't the solution. There's not always a solution when we bring in enforcement action. Sometimes it's the first step. Sometimes it's just another step in getting to compliance. Here, this wasn't a penalty action; it was injunctive relief. But it was, there were already negotiations and discussions going on with the city, and I'll be interested in more discussion on this. I think it was important to have an enforceable order with specified deadlines to really focus the city on what resources it did have, and seeking additional outside resources for the solution to work toward the solution. And it is an ongoing issue. So we're going to talk about the outcome. So in 2023, the cease and desist order was adopted. And since then, the city has been successful in obtaining a number of exemptions for a number of future proposed developments that would help increase housing and tax base, improve its financial stability. They're continuing to have compliance issues, however, and the dialogue is ongoing. They've recently hired special counsel to assist with cease and desist order compliance. I think they've gone through a number of contractors. They've just hired another one. And the monthly meetings continue.
Yeah, and so this is where I'd like to really kind of show you what board members don't typically see, because you'll make a decision, and in that moment you are saying we're either going to go forward with the CDO or not, and that decision is incredibly difficult. Mm-hmm. But you also set the tone for your expectations for your staff. Mm-hmm. And we continue the work afterwards. So in this case, we did continue to issue notices of violations, but we continue to build that rapport with the community. And I would say today that the community is actually very grateful for the CDO. It has allowed them to demonstrate an actual need for public investment and funding for their infrastructure projects. We've been able to provide a third-party technical resource for them as they work with their contractors, which has been crucial. Yvonne mentioned that the city has had some challenges with their vendors in this particular case. And at one point this year actually asked us if we would consider issuing an additional NOV to help bolster their record to demonstrate that the contract with their vendor wasn't working out. And in all of these ways, we've been a good partner to this community. And yes, we've had to extend their construction deadlines. But I think at every step along the way, having the CDO in place, being able to have those deadlines and giving the community a reason to rally around these infrastructure improvements has been really the outcome that we all were working towards.
Yeah, and so really just to kind of emphasize some of those themes, and I know there's a lot of people in the room, the folks in the room who are involved in this, and there's other discussions we could go down the road on, and I want to leave some time for that. Really, ultimately, again, with enforcement action, sometimes it's not the perfect solution, but it's an important first step. Don't let the scope of the problem deter you from taking that first step. Having the support of the board when the staff came to them with this cease and desist order that painted a clear picture of years of noncompliance and ongoing water quality threats and concerns, and just basically a fundamental issue with capacity at this facility. Even though nobody really could identify exactly where those resources were going to come from, it was really important to have that structure, to continue that dialogue, but also to kind of put a timeline on it and some expectations on it, to focus efforts and energies, both of the staff as well as the city, regional board staff as well as the city, to work toward a solution for this small community. And it isn't over yet. And most of these, a lot of times, this is an evolving problems we have with a lot of our small communities. But it is a step, and it was an important step for enforcement at this juncture. And it's proven to be a tool to work towards the solution. So I really just wanted to emphasize that. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, by all means, Patrick.
And I know we're out of time, so it's a magnetic personality here. I would add, for any of the boards and any of the board staff who are interested in the advisory team side of that, always open for questions. I will say incredible amount of credit to the Office of Enforcement and to the regional board's prosecution team in the Fresno office. You often don't associate the word compassion with an enforcement team, but they executed their duty with compassion for this community and the needs of the community. And, the commitment to follow up and the commitment also to being firm with this community really, really helped bridge the gap. I know I lost a lot of sleep advising the board in advance of this cease and desist order hearing, but it did pay dividends. And certainly there was even state board money involved in helping find the solutions, at least for some of the ponds that were out there. I do regard it as a success story, even though the final chapter hasn't been written yet. But like I said, if you have any questions on the advisory team side and how we discussed it with the board, and the intensity of the discussions with the chair leading up to it, feel free to talk to me offline because that was a significant component too.
Thank you for those additions, Patrick. Help me thank our great panelists here for the presentations. Really appreciative of these test cases here. We are at time a bit, but we'll still provide about 15 minutes here for discussion. So if there's questions, please do ask them. I know there aren't any written questions on the Slido, so if there's any questions in person, yeah, please.
Bill Kissinger from Region 2. I'm curious when will the last chapter be written? How far off is the solution?
I think everybody here is well aware of some of the challenges that have come up this year regarding construction projects. And so one of the things that we're working with the city right now is on, they have a new plan. They've done some additional geotechnical investigation that has allowed them to modify their original submitted plan to reduce costs. And so we're hoping that they will be able to break ground this year.
Yeah, please.
Yan Tu from Region 9. Can I assume that because of the disadvantaged community, that there was no financial penalty associated with this order?
I mean, I don't think, yes, there was no financial penalty associated with this order, and it is difficult to impose financial penalties on disadvantaged communities, and sometimes we'll look for other solutions in other ways. And so the injunctive, a cease and desist order with an injunctive time schedule was really, this was self-reported. This was a community that was trying to come into compliance. You know, usually when we pursue a penalty, it's not always, like, we have mandatory minimum penalties that we have to pursue at times. And even, you know, in some circumstances, we will in disadvantaged communities. In this particular one, the choice was not to pursue any penalty.
Any other questions out there? Arma.
Yeah, this question is for Eric. And it sounds like you had a lot of lesson learned on the whole idea of implementing that regulatory conservation as a way of life. So I'm wondering if you were able to document this as a future framework, and is this something that you're actively being used or are actively using to support and I guess work for future regulatory efforts that are going to be coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There were a lot of lessons learned, including from me on this process. I wish when we initiated the rulemaking, even though we had done a lot of pre-rulemaking work, I wish we were closer. That, you know, I wish we put out a regulation that was initially a bit more vetted maybe and closer to what the final looked like, because one of the challenges was when we made adjustments, it was viewed as a rollback, and that engendered a lot of pushback and concern from the environmental community that maybe didn't need to occur if we had started from a different point. But in terms of your question, are we applying this? What I'll say was that originally, you know, this concept of bringing together these focus work groups and really having high intensity detailed discussions originated with our wetlands policy. And we used it for conservation because it works so well. We actually have applied it to the work we're doing right now on the Bay Delta. Bay Delta is its own issue, you know, even frankly more challenging. It's at the heart of California water management and water politics. And so I actually found it very helpful for the Bay Delta, and I think it is helping us move the discussion to a better place. But maybe not quite as effective as it was for conservation. For conservation, like I said when I was speaking, it really was like a pivotal moment where I felt like the momentum was changing from resistance to let's work together and figure out how to make this work. The other thing I didn't mention in my remarks that I thought Eileen did a really good job was recognizing our board, highly educated on this topic. They went out, they looked at field studies, they went and visited water district and looked at what these different standards would actually look like in real time to better understand the challenges. They themselves spent a huge amount of time getting educated so that they were better prepared for decisions.
David, and then we have Betty online.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, I love the way everyone's appreciating their board so much. That's that's always nice to hear in public anyway. I don't know what's said in private though. I just wanted to say that I particularly appreciated Eileen's presentation in talking about the cost of inaction. And I don't think that that enters the conversation anywhere near enough. And it was heartening to see it as part of your presentation. And also there are other benefits when one talks about job creation, innovation. You know, yesterday we talked about technology-based limits. Well, if you base your limits based on present technology, how are you ever going to advance? How are you ever going to innovate and create? So I think having that as part of the discussion, and then when you present that, when you start from a place of purity, what it is that the science tells you, and then, yeah, you may have to compromise based upon feasibility and economic, but you start from a place of what is right. So I very much appreciated that and wanted to commend you, and also to commend your board for supporting you in the decisions that you have to make. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, David. Betty.
Yes. Did I? No.
Oh, did we lose her? Oh, Betty, sorry, 1 second. You should be able to. Okay, we can hear you again. Betty, it keeps muting you, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm probably doing it and I shouldn't be. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. Then my first question is for Eric Oppenheimer. And I wanted to understand the state's position. When you reduce indoor use, you make it more expensive to get from potable recycled water use, and you lower the amount of product that you get. So we're looking at a 15% reduction in product, as well as a more concentrated brine, which makes the whole process of going to potable recycled use more difficult for agencies. And so I wanted to understand why the state, I think it was the legislature who took this position, why they would take that position.
Yeah, good question, and was certainly a topic of discussion and debate during the regulatory process. The legislature did set the indoor standards, and they decline over time, as I mentioned. And this issue did come up, and the board did do an evaluation of how this would affect like concentrations of influent for wastewater treatment and for recycled water. Something that I think is important to keep in mind that I didn't mention as part of my presentation is that these budgets that the water suppliers are required to meet, they're in aggregate. So they're actually not required to meet the indoor number specifically. They're required to meet the sum of all of the things I mentioned, the indoor, the outdoor, the water loss performance standard. Additionally, the legislature, while they did set the indoor numbers, they wanted to incentivize recycled water, and they added what's called a bonus incentive, which is an additional budget that was applied for water agencies that have a portion of their supply as potable reused, indirect potable reused water. And so I think there was an accommodation to recognize this issue, and I think it was adequately addressed. The other thing that personally I always look at is if you're reducing use, you're reducing the increment of water of demand, and so potentially reduces the amount of water you actually do need to recycle, which is, very energy intensive and very expensive. But if you're reducing the overall demand, your overall water needs goes down, regardless of source, recycled.
Well, I think water agencies understand that, but the issue is that the unit cost goes up. And if you took every ounce of recycled water and put it to potable use, it's only 30% of the supply. So I just don't think people can reduce that much. But that's a comment. and I'll end it there. And
Dealt with all the controversy.
now I know, but I still think that, I still think that there are things that can be improved. The other, I wanted to ask about San Francisco, what they did in San Francisco Bay. I think it was really a group effort. Sounded like the wastewater treatment plants really got in there and put their share of money into the studies. I just wanted to know, of the 40 wastewater treatment plants in that area, can you tell me how many have nitrification or how many have denitrification at their plants currently?
I don't know the exact number, so I could not tell you that.
Do you have an idea?
A small percent are doing the nitrification. We're supposed to be getting a study from them by June 30th that's going to tell us who's doing what and what their plans are. I participated, just as a follow-on to your previous, I participated in a meeting or a workshop with over 100 people on Tuesday that was sponsored by Water Reuse and the Bay Area Clean Water Agencies, looking at opportunities for water recycling to reduce nutrients through water recycling. And they were happy to hear that we were looking at, giving them more than 10 years to do these projects, knowing that water recycling takes a long time. So I'll know more after the reports are submitted later this year.
Okay, that's great. I just had one follow on. One of the things that I know right now in the wastewater treatment that's in South Orange County, which is the area that I'm from, they're looking ahead and they're trying to say, even if there's not going to be a regulation in 5 years, but we think there's going to be a regulation in 10, we want to make the improvement on the plant now so that you're not gerrymandering a plant, sort of backwards, but you're also prepared for the future. And I think if we can encourage wastewater, either JPAs or wastewater plants individually, as they go forward to expand their plants or when they have to redo plants, I think that's helpful for them. That's all.
And I'll just add to that. So as I said, we've been studying nutrients with the Bay Area agencies for over a decade. And we have, even per the second nutrient watershed permit that was issued in 2019, we have what they're called early actors. So we knew it was a matter of time. So we have a number of the 40 wastewater agencies. Some are in the planning stage, some are in design, some are in construction of making the treatment plant upgrades. Numerous ones saw the writing on the wall coming long before the harmful algae bloom. San Francisco Bay is one of the most nutrient-enriched estuaries in the world and just hasn't seen the impacts of the Chesapeake Bay and other estuaries worldwide until August of 2022. So the writing has been on the wall and some didn't wait. And also, in the Bay Area, having run one of the largest wastewater agencies, they all have aging infrastructure. So when there was opportunities to address certain aging infrastructure, we encouraged them to take advantage of that. So there was the economy of scales, so they weren't doing individual projects. So I feel like because we've been at the table for a long time with the wastewater agencies, a lot of them have already taken action. And I want to give them credit for that, in addition to funding the studies to the tune of over $15 million over the last 10 years.
So the ones that, so it's the larger utility.
Betty.
Okay, I'll stop. Thank you.
No, I apologize, Betty. We're just a little over time.
Okay,
But
no
I really
problem.
appreciate,
No
really
problem.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
great comments and questions. Join me again in thanking the panel for their leadership and work here.
I don't want to talk.
All right, now we will transition to our last round of regional updates. And so we'll have regional updates from the Central Valley Regional Board, the Lahontan region, the Santa Ana region, Colorado, and San Diego. And so as folks are transitioning up here, I did want to acknowledge, many of you who are longstanding board members know Nancy Wright from the Colorado River Regional Water Quality Control Board. She has not missed a WQCC, I think, in as long as I have certainly been here. Regrettably, she had a medical emergency here just in Sacramento as she was coming here, and just wanted to acknowledge that we wish Nancy well and a speedy recovery. Think things are worked out. She's going to be okay. But just wanted to acknowledge her missing her here today, and just really thankful for her leadership. All right. I think we'll kick things off with Patrick from the Central Valley.
Thanks so much. And as per usual, I don't often have slides. I prefer to get into the meat of it and frankly answer more questions so that we can have a bit of a discussion. So I also probably won't use up all of my time either, so that we can have a little, maybe recover some of the time that we ran over for the other one. 3 issues I want to talk about that are hot topics in the Central Valley, all of which will likely lead to tough decisions by the board in the upcoming years. The 3 ones I'm going to be talking about today are the reimagining and the review of the Delta Methyl Mercury Control Program, the general order utilization through our non-15 program, and ongoing efforts within the CV salts nitrate control program, especially in the Modesto subbasin that we're going to be taking on in the years to come. First, I will talk about one of the toughest nuts to crack here in the Central Valley, which is the methyl mercury control program. Methyl mercury, as we all know, is a very potent neurotoxin. In the Central Valley, there's about a battleship's worth of mercury, inorganic mercury, within the sediment of the channels that lead into the delta. Now, this is a potent neurotoxin that's usually measured in nanograms per liter, something that's important to deal with. And that kind of gives you the scope of the problem. It was mined out in the Coast Range, which is, especially in the Cache Creek watershed, and was used throughout the mother lode to essentially develop gold deposits. You basically melted down the mercury, it scavenged gold, and as you used the sluice controls, you could use it to then boil off the gold and then reuse the mercury. However, massive amounts of that mercury were lost to the waterways as a part of that process. In 2010, the regional board adopted a methylmercury TMDL for the Delta waterways. That TMDL at the time was called one of the most complicated TMDLs that the regional boards had ever done. It essentially carved the Delta into 9 subwatersheds and basically adopted a strategy that looked at the fish tissue in trophic level 3 and 4 fish, so the large predator fish within the Delta, back calculated what it would take to make about 1 meal per week of those fish that wouldn't lead to adverse health impacts, and then back calculated an aqueous methylmercury goal for each of these delta sub areas, and then used that to develop waste load and load allocations for these delta sub areas. We didn't quite know what we were doing at the time, and that is to say it's baked into the Delta Methyl Mercury Control Program that there would be a phased approach to implementation. Phase 1 was to take about 10 years and basically tear off of the millions of dollars of work that had already been done in this field. A lot of CalFed dollars, for those of you who remember CalFed, were used to basically work on methylmercury issues in the Delta, work on methylmercury issues related to mining concerns in the Cache Creek watershed, and contributions from inorganic mercury sources tied to those mines. The problem was, and the problem now that kind of sits in our lap, is those studies show that methylmercury is far more stubborn than was initially anticipated in that TMDL. If we dial back on all controllable factors within the Delta, we will not meet that 1 meal per week target in any way, shape, or form. Not even close. And you add to that now there are tribal issues and tribal concerns asking for more meals per week out of Delta fish, especially striped bass, which accumulate methylmercury very easily. And so now the board is left with very, very difficult decisions to make on how to reformulate this TMDL and how to have the tough conversations with tribal communities. There's a fairly significant Hmong subsistence fishermen population within the Delta. But there's actually no way to meet that 1 meal per week using any available technology that we have at our disposal right now. The inputs from upstream, from the Sacramento River, from the Colomie River, to a lesser extent from the San Joaquin, combined with the flux from the sediment, which currently underlies most of the Delta, simply will not achieve those Delta Mercury objectives, even if we crank down on MS4s. It's about the overall loading, it's about 640 grams that are creating the methyl mercury issues. If we crank down on the 1 gram coming out of the Sacramento MS4 system, it cost about a $1.12 billion, and it would knock out that 1 gram. We would still be miles and miles and miles away from meeting the 1 meal per week target set forth in the methyl mercury control program. That's not to say an incredible amount of research, an incredible amount of brain power from the regional board staff and from DWR and the water contractors, agricultural interests, SAC Regional have been applied to this problem. I just will say that, I don't actually have any solutions to this particular issue as I sit up here today. I am announcing it simply because there will be very tough conversations that will lie in the lap of our board as we move forward. And it will need to utilize all channels of communication with very, very severely disadvantaged populations within the Delta, conversations with anglers, conversations with the regulated entities, and conversations with the water contractors and other folks who transport Delta water south to essentially deliver water to millions of agricultural acres and, populations from Los Angeles, San Diego, and many, many other points south. Again, no solutions here. If you can think of a good one off the top of your head, let me know. But I want to essentially talk to you about one of the tough issues that we're dealing with, both from a technological front and from a communications and environmental equity perspective. Next up is, I think I'm sure Eric and Joaquin are tired of hearing about how the Central Valley is under-resourced and frankly under-resourced compared to the other regions, despite the fact that we have more disadvantaged populations than any other area of the state. The amount of permit writers and inspectors that we have per facility is about a third of that which most of the other regions enjoy, particularly in the non-15 program. The non-15 program includes communities like Arvin that run a wastewater treatment plant. Arvin is actually in the 100th percentile for poverty within the state. It is just about the most impoverished community in the entire state of California. And so what we're working on here at the Central Valley is taking a pause and trying to strategize about ways to do things differently. I know that there's no influx of resources coming into the Central Valley. I know there's not even a rebalancing of resources coming into the Central Valley anytime soon. I understand that there are political reasons for that, and those political reasons go back decades. So what we have on our plate is a challenge to reimagine how we're doing some of these issues. I think Region 3, to a certain extent, sets an excellent example in that they are probably the only region that comes close to being as under-resourced as we are within the non-15 program area. And what they've done over the years, and our program manager for this program has talked with Jennifer over the years, is they've led the way in developing a series of general orders that really cover a lot of facilities. We have not yet been able to do that simply because we have a slightly broader array of facilities, but it's something that we're going to need to do if we're going to keep pace with all of the water quality concerns in the valley. These are the permits that protect groundwater. These are the permits that protect drinking water as the primary source for many of these communities in the valley. Issues relating to PFAS, 1,2,3-TCP, arsenic, radionuclides, and nitrate all come into play in trying to develop general orders to protect these areas. So again, that's an issue. I've talked with my board that they're going to see general orders and they're going to see us stretching the bounds of what can be done simply to address the resource limitations that we have in our region and that are particular to our region. And last but not least, I've talked many years, a few WQCCs now, about the nitrate control program, which is the board's program to address primarily agricultural sources, but also POTW, industrial sources, septic sources of nitrogen in the Central Valley's aquifers. Essentially, most of the Central Valley floor is a nitrate plume, as I've discussed in years past. And so the nitrate control program is our effort to get our arms around the program to grant fairly long compliance schedules for those discharges that are contributing to that nitrate contamination as we sit here today. That includes dairies, that includes agricultural discharges, and there's very, very few of the 500 wastewater facilities that are in compliance with their nitrate load limits. And that includes septic systems too, which are contributing to that load. In the upcoming year and a half, we'll be developing a permit for the Modesto sub-area, which is one of the very many management zones that are forming up, that will include load reduction strategies for each of those subcategories, and will also bolster the current efforts to address near-term and long-term drinking water needs of the communities that are currently impacted by nitrate discharges. It's a long, complicated program. There's currently a lot of well sampling occurring, but it needs to be more than bottled water. It needs to be more than fill stations, and that's really what we're embarking on, that kind of two-pronged approach of drinking water replacement strategies and nitrate load reduction targets within the major areas that are contributing to nitrate contamination in groundwater. So easy stuff, right? I've got an okay board. They are, I do say they are taking on some of the most difficult, entrenched and water quality issues in the state of California with less resources than any of the other regional boards. And I do commend anybody who accepts that call to action and serves on our board. It's truly an extraordinary group of individuals who wants to take on these challenges. And with that, I'll turn it over to Region 6.
Thanks, Patrick. I realize we share borders and we're sitting next to each other at the same time. That's convenient. Good almost afternoon. My name is Ben Letton. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer and Acting Executive Officer for Region 6. So I planned on talking about Mike Plasiak and the tribute I made yesterday during this time, but we took care of that yesterday morning. So I'll hopefully be rather quick in my update as well. I'm going to cover 3 topics. I'm going to talk about our tribal beneficial use designation project at Mono Lake. I'm going to give an update of the PG&E Hinckley facility and an overview and some of the achievements, successes in our enforcement program. Next slide. Okay, so I've talked about this project a couple of times at WQCC, well, at least once in the past, and this continues to be one of our biggest focus in terms of trying to review and basin planning work. This is a project that goes back quite a few years, really started in 2021 when we were contacted by the Kutsetica tribe with a request to designate tribal tradition and culture, beneficial use, and tribal subsistence fishing for Mono Lake and its tributaries. We, about that same time, adopted those definitions into our basin plan. We held a really powerful public meeting, scoping meeting in 2024 in April, so about a year ago, where Kutsetica, members of the Kutsetica tribe, interested parties, other tribes from all over the state attended and provided a very powerful public comment supporting the designation of Mono Lake and its tributaries under those uses. We had scheduled originally to bring this to our board for consideration in November of 2024, but there were still some things to work out in terms of those designations, specifically with respect to tribal subsistence fishing in the tributary streams. So we postponed that hearing, and I just want to thank the state board members for a series of briefings that we had. No details, but I think we got really great input, and it was definitely one of those projects where it was good to slow down and take some time to get it right. And that was really the desire of the tribe. And I'm looking forward to moving forward again, and our staff are moving forward. Our board's looking forward to that in the coming year. I think we're close to having some more guidance and specificity, interpretation that we need to move forward. So looking forward to that in the coming year. I really want to thank Adriana Renteria, Phil Wiles, Jonathan Bishop, state board members, Eric Oppenheimer, for helping us navigate through the last few months in particular. It was really good to feel the support and leadership, and realizing that we needed some help being the first region to go through this water body designation process. So I just want to extend my gratitude to those folks who really stepped up and showed leadership, and Jonathan Bishop, who's retired now, but I'm glad that he helped prioritize things a little bit from the OCC perspective so that we could make that happen. Next slide. Okay, so PG&E Hinckley, this is a site that we've been engaged on for quite some time. PG&E first reported hexavalent chromium in groundwater and cleanup, an issuance of a cleanup abatement order almost 40 years ago. Remediation at the site began in 1992. The selected remediation methods for the site are in situ remediation and agricultural treatment units. The site, for those of you that are unfamiliar, is a compressor station for natural gas coming from out of state. Compression of the gas in the pipeline generates a ton of heat. And so there needs to be extensive cooling that occurs for the whole system to function properly. Historically, they used a number of chemicals to reduce the amount of corrosion in the system with regard to cooling the water, and hexavalent chromium was one of those chemicals. Unfortunately, much of the discharge from the site that occurred 60 to 70 years ago went right into unlined ponds. Because the site is situated in the desert, much of that discharged water and chemicals went directly into the aquifer. Other sites like Kettleman City, where similar compression stations are located, have not experienced the same amount of contamination, partly due to soils and the lithology and the associated biological activity that breaks down chromium-6. Unfortunately, in the case of the compressor station at Hinckley as well, there was a community down gradient, so the plume flowed right into the community wells. PG&E performed a background study in 2007 to establish cleanup values. At that time, the community was pretty concerned about the validity of such study, and it resulted in extensive peer review of that background study. Chromium does occur naturally in the environment in this area, so an important and challenging aspect of the cleanup effort has been trying to determine what levels are due to discharge from chromium-laden coolant from the compressor station, and what concentrations are naturally occurring in the environment, so anthropogenic versus naturally occurring. Based largely on some of those concerns from the public and the need for an independent study, the USGS was contracted in 2015 to perform a background study on natural and anthropogenic chromium in the Hinckley Valley. A final background study report was released in April of 2023. In 2015, so same time frame, a revised cleanup and abatement order was issued to PG&E with remedial targets to reach and maintain 50 parts per billion of hexavalent chromium and total chromium in 90% of the wells by December 31st of 2025, and to reach and maintain 10 parts per billion of hexavalent chromium in 80% of the wells by December 31st, 2032. And I'm proud to report that they've already met those milestones. Water Board staff plan to revise the CAO using information from the 2023 USGS background report to establish cleanup values and milestones to measure continued progress of remediation. And I just wanted to add that in January of this year, we had our annual update to the board on this site. We do that every single year. And I sensed a shift, at least in the attitude of the public and the community members. They really offered a lot of words of support and optimism for the work that's being done by PG&E and Water Board staff. There was acknowledgement that PG&E has done a lot of great work, and that the community really appreciates that and respects that. PG&E has an independent review panel. They're called Project Navigator, and they helped us and our staff host a field tour as part of that annual update. It was well attended. We had probably 40 to 50 participants, including Nicole Morgan and all 6 of our board members. And I want to also give a shout out and thanks to Jackie Carpenter, who's with our comms department, not only for helping us get the word out about the field tour, but also just the general work that she's been doing and her team's been doing in terms of communications with the news media. There's been movies that focused at PG&E Hinckley. There's been documentaries and other media coverage over the years. And it's really been important to focus on the facts at the site and try to mitigate, the bad press, if you will. Next slide. So my final slide in regional priority is related to our enforcement program. As the lead for the prosecution team as AEO, this has been a focus for me since assuming that role in 2021. So not tooting my own horn, but I'm certainly the head of our enforcement program. And Yvonne, wherever you are, thanks for all your support and helping us do that. I'll toot your horn too. Another thing that's been really helpful with this enforcement program is retired annuitants. Retired annuitants plays a huge role for us in reestablishing this program and providing a solid foundation in terms of our enforcement approach and developing strong enforcement documents and orders. Another huge addition improvement for us has been the role of our enforcement coordinator. The position we created a couple of years ago, which has been instrumental in our success. I want to thank Region 3 for some of preliminary conversations we had with them about setting up a position like that. We'll continue to emphasize compliance through informal enforcement. And in fact, this little figure or picture there kind of demonstrates what we've been trying to emphasize in our enforcement, which is what I call the 80-20 rule. And that is 80% of our effort should be focused on informal enforcement, return to compliance, and about 20% on formal enforcement. Staff have been increasing field presence to better assist dischargers in returning to compliance. We are conducting inspections throughout the region with focused areas where we've had the greatest number of violations, mostly in our construction stormwater and industrial stormwater programs. One of the focus areas has been the Truckee River watershed and the Lake Tahoe watershed, both of which are impaired water bodies, Truckee for suspended sediment and Tahoe for fine sediment and nutrients. The Truckee River watershed in particular has seen a lot of development pressure in recent years, particularly since COVID, the pandemic, with a lot of contractors coming in from outside the area to do work. We've seen repeated violations, again, of the construction stormwater general permit, the Lake Tahoe construction general permit, and also issues with Caltrans and their stormwater permitting. We've been using compressed ACLs when applicable and encouraging lots of settlement discussions and development of supplemental environmental projects. for pretty much all of our compressed ACLs and ACLs. As I mentioned earlier on this slide, we've really benefited from having the support of retired annuitants in our enforcement program. I have to acknowledge Wendy Wiles, who worked with our region over several years to help us move forward successfully and setting up good working templates again for ACLs. Over the past 2 years, we have had several successful settlement agreements associated with ACLs. With several $1 million going to the cleanup and abatement account, in addition to several supplemental environmental projects that'll benefit the environment and water quality. Right now, the Region 6 prosecution team is working on 5 ACL settlements, 2 compressed ACLs with supplemental environmental projects, 3 ACLCs with 2 SEPs, and 1 is in early process. And then another area of focus in our enforcement program has been our focus on addressing minimum mandatory penalties on a more routine basis, development of MMP review process every 6 months to manage MMPs and identify where dischargers addressed systematic issues. And we've been successful the past several years hitting all of our enforcement program performance targets associated with MMPs. And I think that concludes my report. Thanks.
Okay. So good morning. My name is Michael Placencia, Executive Officer for Colorado River Basin Regional Board, also known as Region 7. I want to thank Chair Esquivel for acknowledging the absence of our board member, Nancy Wright. We wish her a speedy recovery. I also want to acknowledge the presence of our chair, Vivian Perez, and go on the record as stating, actually, Region 7 has the best board. So I'm here to provide updates on 3 priorities or projects. Like Patrick, I won't have any slides. I'll just tackle this via conversationally with these bullets. Many of the projects are intertwined and interconnected with each other and with the other work that our staff perform. It's hard to pick 3 because it seems like everything touches on everything else that we do. There's a lot of work behind the scenes in any of these 3 projects that I'll be discussing here today, but understand also that it's all buttressed by a large infrastructure of other activities that that our board covers, engages with. So the first one I'll discuss is, again, some of these will be a combination of things. So I'd like to talk about septic to sewer and salt and nutrient management plans. One of the and each of these discussions I want to frame as the freshman executive officer here, having 6 months, having just graduated 6 months on the job. And so it was not only onboarding, it was getting familiar with the region and being new to state employment. So regarding septic to sewer and the salt and nutrient management plans, they're heavily dependent on groundwater data. If you don't have the technical basis to determine the loading from each of these activities and discharges, if you don't have an understanding of the hydrogeology, the process of tackling or imposing necessary actions such as septic system prohibitions, for example, or providing for the development of these salt and nutrient management plans that then result in control plans for discharges. You don't have much to work with. So we have continually augmented the groundwater data monitoring and reporting, and hopefully that will result in additional benefits to these programs. I have been working, of course, to get familiar with the programs, the stakeholders, and the status of each of these projects. And as you know, when the more complex a project is, the more rounds of comment or opportunities for to be heard by the stakeholders is it benefits the process. You have transparent communication, and when you finally get to that difficult board decision, you hope that at least the dust has settled on what is uncertain about some of these topics and how you can present that data to both the discharger, potential permittees, and also to the board. We have multiple subbasins regarding septic, sanitary sewer nutrient management plans and septic systems. We're dealing with multiple subbasins with idiosyncratic groundwater characteristics, land and water use, and hydrogeology, and all of that informs, of course, the necessity of these development specific control instruments. I have had the benefit of learning from other regions. I reached out to Jane Joy in Region 8, and she was able to provide me with some support for the salt and nutrient management plan and the implementation there, the lessons they may have learned along the way, and also candidly looking at what is the distinction between their management plan and ours, and why some of those things are can't be applied across the board. In addition to that, going through the process of determining the tools that are available to me, State Water Board Exec, Division of Water Resources, Office of Chief Counsel, et cetera, determining those resources and in which way those can be leveraged to do the work. I should take the time to thank Eric Oppenheimer and others for some support on some specific topics in the region that benefited from their interactions. The second thing I'd like to talk about today is our irrigated agricultural lands general orders, and the process of managing the permittees, members, and those coalitions. These are recently issued general orders. They're first round general orders. So outreach and messaging and an 80-20 approach to at least early interactions with them regarding enforcement have been, I think, critical. We're continuing to work through providing for support diplomatically, coordinating with them before escalating enforcement. And as Yvonne mentioned, issuance of an NOV and other enforcement doesn't have to be the first step, doesn't have to be the last step. It's one of the tools in the process. And what we are all attempting to do is grow the trust that we have with these coalitions, and of course gain and maintain compliance with the requirements. As I mentioned, we are working through the implementation of these general orders, and so there are some hiccups along the way, and not the least of which some of these recipients of the general order, these enrollees, they are the largest, most organized, largest employers in the area, largest landholders, and at the same time, on the flip side of that, also have the potential to be impactful dischargers. So speaking back to the first item, we are working to profile and quantify impacts from these discharges, get additional groundwater, surface water data, and allow that, provide for the technical basis for strong decision making. The third topic I wanted to talk about here is probably the biggest one. It is a slow moving ecological disaster, and one that I see that the state is throwing quite a lot of resources and support behind, which is the Salton Sea. It is, it's a robust and complex topic. I've been working to understand and get familiar with the partnerships and programs in the area associated with the Salton Sea, provide outreach to regional community groups, government groups, non-governmental organizations, stakeholders, provide for tribal outreach, as well as hope to continue to innovatively explore options. The Salton Sea is a 320 square mile body of water, largest lake in California. It is highly saline, and it is a very challenging circumstance in that it doesn't provide necessarily for direct treatment of the Salton Sea. So we are working to tackle it from, what things we can do, which is tributaries to the Salton Sea. I've been working to hear about past interactions, learning from past misunderstandings or missteps in community groups in the region, providing an empathetic and providing for those difficult conversations. I mentioned trust building and having those honest conversations regarding available resources, the limits of what we can do, and where our responsibilities lie. As I mentioned, it's a highly complex and significant ecological crisis. As the quantitative standardization agreement, QSA. As the QSA is continually implemented, the shoreline, of course, is receding. Not only does that concentrate the remaining water that comprises the Salton Sea, but it also exposes the playa, presenting some significant dust and air quality concerns. So there are, of course, large efforts to provide for dust suppression, and those are ongoing. Our efforts to develop regulatory frameworks and to communicate those to stakeholders in the region. They would include, of course, total maximum daily load development, water quality standards development. And these efforts, as we all know, take a lot of time. They require the comprehensive collecting of data over seasons and years. Profiling of these discharges and the receiving waters can be, of course, expensive. It can be challenging in that, for example, we can't launch watercraft at the Salton Sea currently. So there are additional hurdles to profiling that water. Naturally, all of this data collected takes a period of time to prepare reports, both for internal digestion and for release to the public. Publicly noticed meetings require careful and measured legislative steps that also take time. And it is critical to keep each of these projects on track, because as they already take so much time, any additional delay just results in additional questions from the community about why they take so much time. And we continue to reinforce that work is being done and hold public meetings so that we can provide information on where we are with the status of each of these of the efforts in the region. I mentioned the Irrigated Lands General Order and the significance of discharges. Those discharges happen to be to the New River, the Coachella Storm Channel, and the Alamo Rivers, all three tributaries to the Salton Sea. So that work is directly tied to mitigation of impacts from those discharges and how those directly impact the Salton Sea and quality thereof. The Salton Sea does not exist wholly within the United States. We also coordinate binational cooperation and support to tackle incoming pollution on north flowing borders from Mexico. That's the New River and the Alamo River. I'm sure you've heard plenty about that. And so interacting with our Mexican counterparts to provide that support. We recently had a California-Mexico binational relations council meeting in the area. I want to thank Secretary Garcia for her attendance there and for all the work in the area. But again, it's another complex topic working within that framework. To that end, I also want to shout out the State Water Board's annual workshop on the Salton Sea Management Plan. Will be May 21st in Thermal near the Salton Sea. And this concludes my update.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good almost afternoon. My name is John Scandura, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board. Our Executive Officer, Jane Joy, had every intention of coming here today and making this presentation. Unfortunately, she fell ill over the weekend, and so out of abundance of caution, she decided to stay at home. Had she attended this meeting, this would have been her very last meeting with us. She will be retiring this summer. Huge loss. We're really going to be missing her. She's, for me personally, been just a tremendous resource in helping me to become a board member. And so we are going to be recruiting for the position starting on Monday. If you know of anybody that would be interested in the position, please encourage them to apply. We have a great staff, terrific office and office location, and I find the board to be a rather fun group to work with. So there's a lot of reasons to apply, but hard shoes to fill for that person taking over from Jane. So we have lots of activities that similar to what were discussed by the other regions, but today we wanted to focus on a couple of site cleanups, if I could have the next slide. One is an old aerospace facility that somehow resurrected from the grave, and then the other is an old military base where, along with our regulatory counterparts, we achieved national recognition. The first, if I could have the next slide, is the Ford Aeroneutronics plant located in, of all places, Newport Beach, California. This was, and there were a number of these facilities throughout Southern California where they would do weapons development. They would actually do the R&D for the weapons development, and then they would take it to another place somewhere else to actually test out those weapons. I worked on a number of these at DT when I was with DTSC. In fact, the site that was where they did the testing range was one of my sites. But this facility opened up back in 1957, and believe it or not, there was nothing out in that location back then. And so it was a great place to do this kind of work. Well, by the early 1990s, the entire area around there had completely developed. In fact, I went to school not too far from there. And of course, the Cold War had ended, so along with that was the need for this kind of facility. So Ford closed it down. They asked the Regional Water Quality Control Board to oversee their cleanup back in the 1990s, and they did that. They utilized all the standard methods of investigating and cleaning up sites that existed in that day. And in 1997, the Water Board granted closure to this facility. And in doing so, it allowed for the development that you can kind of see underneath the outline of the facility. And as you can see, the facility covered the entire area in red, but most of the operations occurred in the main area. Today, well, let me backtrack a little bit if we can have the next slide. 15 years after the closure was granted, the action levels for TCE were tightened up because of fetal heart defects. And so it turned out that whereas the old levels of TCE in soil were in compliance with the old action levels back in the 1990s, by 2012, 2013, they had greatly exceeded the new action levels. And so it necessitated reopening of this site. And of course, therein were the challenges, because a lot of sites that we deal with, they tend to be vacant lots, like old gas station properties or old industrial properties where the buildings have been demolished. Here, it's completely developed. And so it's a huge challenge trying to locate your soil vapor probes, your groundwater wells, your soil vapor extraction wells, and all the pipes and pumps and ancillary systems that go with it. Because you have to work around all of these houses and buildings and commercial centers. So Ford has been very cooperative to us on this site, and they embarked on an investigation where they wound up finding two soil gas plumes, one almost a mile in length and about 1,500 feet long, the other one a little bit smaller, about 1,100 feet in length. Again, through 8 residential neighborhoods, condominium complexes, single-family residential complexes, townhouse complexes, nice, very expensive complexes, no less. They have performed soil gas sampling locations throughout this area 2 to 3 times per year. They also targeted almost 600 homes for investigation. In the end, they were granted access to about 400 homes. A number of the homeowners, quite a large number, opted out for various reasons. So they were able to sample some 400 homes. They also did groundwater investigation in select areas, and then the remediation that they're developing is a combination of soil vapor extraction to remove the larger plume, as well as subslab depressurization in a few of the homes to actually address the vapors in the homes. And so with our next slide, as you can see, we can have our next slide. You will see the area in the yellow, which is where we have subslab depressurization systems. And one of the things you're going to notice is that they are actually, it's outside of the main area where much of the R&D occurred. So if we can have the next slide, we installed 14 subslab depressurization systems. They've been operating since November 2023. We also had to replace a lot of the air purifying units. A lot of times when these kinds of things happen, they put air purifying units in there. We had to replace those. We've actually had Ford go back in there and actually confirm that these systems are operating properly. And like a lot of these soil gas sites, the bulk of the contamination is typically found about 5 to 15 feet below the ground surface. If we could have the next slide, you'll see where our soil vapor extraction systems are located. We actually have 2 of them. One of them is in the community of Bay Ridge Park, and then the other is Belcourt Terrace. So if we could show the next slide. And you can see what's outlined in blue is the soil vapor extraction system in Bay Ridge Park. That's all a large condominium complex. And as you can see, the most optimal locations to put your soil vapor extraction wells or your probes wind up being in people's living rooms or underneath the barbecue in their backyard or in the jacuzzi in the clubhouse complex. You just couldn't do it. They had to instead rely on common areas, on roads, and in other places where it didn't impact the residences. So that became a rather large challenge. In fact, despite their best efforts, a couple of the residents objected to it because they felt the systems would be too noisy and too loud and unsightly and some other things. Luckily, the city of Newport Beach granted the permit for Ford to install that extraction system. So that worked out pretty well. You can also see in the next slide our other soil vapor extraction system, a smaller one, which is in Belcourt Terrace. 8 wells in this community. Like the other system, it's been operating for about a year now. Now, as you can see, this is located in what's now a very affluent community. Many of these people, when they bought their homes or townhouses or moved into their condominiums, they were under the impression that the site had been cleaned up. So needless to say, it wasn't very pleasant news for them to suddenly find out that there were still contamination issues in there. So if we have the next slide, we had to undergo an enormous amount of community outreach. Reaching out to 13 neighborhoods, the 8 impacted neighborhoods plus 5 more neighborhoods surrounding it, over 25 community meetings, 14 fact sheets. All of them have been posted on our website, all the work notices. We had to make sure that these fact sheets were in plain English and not in the technical language that we also speak. You'll also see, it's kind of hard to see from here, but in the lower slide, I believe is our project manager, Jessica Law. She's a geologist. We were extremely lucky to have her as the project manager, a tremendous communicator, very empathetic individual. She had a way of being able to reach out to all the residents, to the elected officials, to the city staff. She's been working very effectively with Ford Aerospace. And I think she's a huge reason why this has worked out so well, and we've been able to get such a very complicated project through. We even had, if we can have the next slide, and some of our community outreach, we've actually gone out into the community. If we can have the next slide. Uh-oh. That's the best slide. Okay. Believe it or not, we actually had one meeting out in the pool for people. And what I've been told is nobody was thrown into the pool, nobody fell into the pool, and I guess they didn't go swimming after the meeting. But that just shows you a little bit of the community outreach that we had to do, literally going into the community, as well as having public meetings in at the City of Newport Beach City Hall, which was close by there. So the work is ongoing. Again, a very challenging site. So if we go to the next slide, and this is the military base where we were happy to be part of the team of regulatory agencies that included US EPA and DTSC, and of course the Air Force's base restoration program, the former Norton Air Force Base out in San Bernardino. If we can go to the next slide. This is a major base that opened during World War II. It was primarily a logistics base. It was also a military airlift command. They also staged troops for going to the Vietnam War back in the 1960s and 1970s. One of the biggest installations in the Air Force's program, but in 1989, they announced the closure of that base, which occurred in 1994. And like all of the other military bases, I'm sure we all live in or near communities that were impacted by those closures. It had a devastating impact upon the economy. But nonetheless, the Air Force and the regulatory agencies took it upon themselves to essentially clean up hundreds of sites, underground storage tanks, spill areas, landfills, gun ranges. All of those had to be cleaned up. Also, all buildings had to be evaluated for asbestos and other kinds of building material problems before they could be evaluated, before they could be transferred to the community. And that was one of the things the regulatory agencies did. And then finally, there were two major groundwater plumes underneath the base, one in the central base area and then the other along the base boundary, Those groundwater treatment systems were installed in the mid-1990s. They operated properly and successfully for about 10 years, achieving their cleanup goals to the point where they were actually able to decommission these systems. The property was transferred to Inland Valley Development Authority. They now use the old air base for their airport. They take quite a bit they have some airlines, a lot of private jets, a lot of air cargo traffic that goes through that airport. And then around there are a number of big of warehouses that have gone in on that property by some of the major companies. Mattel, Stater Brothers, and God forbid Amazon is also located out there. So because of the effectiveness of this cleanup, the effectiveness of this cleanup, if we can go to the next slide, US EPA, DTSC, the Regional Water Quality Control Board were recognized along with the Air Force for excellence in site reuse. And we had that award ceremony back in September. That's me speaking. Luckily, my face is a little bit dark. Luckily, we were in an air-conditioned room because outside it was 110 degrees. And after that the ceremony, we actually did a tour of the base, thankfully in an air-conditioned bus, but we could see how all the base was now being reused for productive uses. So it was a tremendous achievement on our part. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. And I know we're running a little late on time, but welcome now Dave Gibson to provide his update virtually.
Thank you, Chair Escobar. Thank you, everyone. I'm really sorry that I can't be there in person today, but you'll be very happy to note I have a very short presentation that'll leave room for questions. Next slide. The regional board adopted a practical vision, a strategic plan in 2013 with 5 chapters and updated it in 2021. And it includes chapter 1, which is strategizing for healthy waters and identifying environmental outcome priorities to be addressed in key beneficial uses in key areas. So I have presented for you today 4 categories or projects that will be important regulatory actions for the board to address in the coming year for key beneficial uses, key areas. Of course, top of that list is border pollution, which is our top environmental justice impact. Besides the water quality impacts, including 1,240 days of consecutive beach closures in Imperial Beach, it also has resulted in significant air quality issues. The hydrogen sulfide concentrations measured about a half a mile from the river in the midst of a community at a school have ranged from 30 parts per million, the health threshold, to over 290 parts per billion, far exceeding the health threshold. This is entirely the result of almost 3 years of continuous flows of raw sewage or sewage-dominated stormwater. The Water Board has already approved 2 advanced restoration plans. These are interim steps towards TMDLs, one for trash, very significant, although we've been talking mainly about sewage, and one for bacterial indicators. The implementation plan for both of those types of constituents is the record of decision for several projects, 9 of them in total, approved by US EPA and the 2 sections of the International Boundary and Water Commission. Those will include river diversion, enhanced collection system, and an increased treatment of wastewater and the development of a trash boom. Coming up during the coming year, we may have an opportunity with the International Boundary and Water Commission to amend their permit for the short term to reduce river flows by diverting more sewage from Mexico's collection system that's currently being released to the river into the wastewater treatment plant in San Ysidro, operated by the IBWC. They could take about 2 million gallons per day right now and up to 10 million gallons per day over the next several years while they're working on the next project, which is already underway, the expansion of the International Wastewater Treatment Plant from 25 million gallons per day to 50 million gallons per day with a peak flow capacity of 75 million gallons. This project would account for about 65% of Tijuana's sewering needs, most of which right now are not met. With the San Antonio de los Buenos wastewater treatment plant that has just now come online, that would take care of about 85% of Tijuana's raw sewage treatment needs. Note, that's not 100%. 85%. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. Proposition 4 was approved by the voters in November. As you heard yesterday, there's opportunities for border rivers pollution control projects. So like Region 7, we've identified potential projects with local, federal, and international organizations, aggregating about 267 of potential project costs and perhaps as much as $124 million of potential funding requests. So Department of Division of Financial Assistance will have its work cut out, carrying that down to a reasonable allocation across the 2 regions for the most important of those projects. And can you hit the play button on that video link at the bottom, Meredith? Let's see if it'll play. Great. This is a trash boom that was funded by Senate Bill 170. The project was implemented by the Rural Community Assistance Center, and it installed a floatable trash boom in the main channel of the Tijuana River. That channel goes from essentially 0 flow under normal conditions to, in this case, about 60 or 70 million gallons per day, up to 125,000 cubic feet per second on a really bad day. So that trash boom's actually worked really well. And what you can see right there is it's collected about 456 tons of trash, mainly plastic bottles. You can imagine the volume of that, as well as some tires. So a very successful test run. Project J in that record of decision is a full final federally funded trash boom. This project will inform that, but unfortunately, unless funding can be extended, it has to be taken down next February, right in the middle of the rainy season. So that's a key issue going forward in terms of addressing trash. But the advanced restoration plan for that envisions this, and we are pushing very hard for Project J or a continuation of a state-funded project to address trash there. Next slide. Key MPDS permits, and to address a number of key beneficial uses in key areas, several backlogged permits as a result of US EPA delays and funding delays at the regional board are coming forward this year. The Point Loma Ocean outfall, probably one of the first permits that will test new language after the Supreme Court decision last year that you heard about from Michael Lawfer, is coming up. It includes a 301H waiver issued by US EPA, so we'll have joint hearings. We've already had one, we'll have another this year. But it also included, as part of a stipulated agreement for that 301H waiver in the last permit, a continuation of the Pure Water program for recycled wastewater reuse, potable indirect and indirect potable reuse projects. Phase 1 is under construction right now. Phase 2 is envisioned to provide about 50% of City of San Diego's water needs in the future. The regional stormwater permit, which is a watershed-based permit for all 10 hydrologic units having watershed water quality improvement plans, is also coming up next year. Key issues there include stormwater harvesting and reuse of blue-green infrastructure development to reduce flows and include reduce flooding issues, and especially in South Bay communities, and the bacterial indicators update or TMDL. Also, the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy has 3 main facilities, about 33 ancillary facilities, about 35,000 total personnel and civilian contractors, 56 ships, and it's one of the most impactful potential activities in San Diego Bay and surrounding areas. We have regulated all 3 bases independently. We're consolidating now into one permit. Note, these are separate from the Marine Corps facilities at the training depot, the Miramar, and then at Camp Pendleton. But we'll be able to consolidate these and continue the approach we've had with the Navy collaboratively, where we regulate the dry side of the base, for example, the Burger King and the barracks, as a phase 2 stormwater facility, and the wet side of the base, including the piers, the ammunition depot, and so on, as an industrial facility. And then finally, rounding out this set of priorities is the East County Advanced Purification Project. Again, this is a potable reuse project that will provide 33% of San Diego's needs for water in the East County. The key agencies there are Padre Dam, my water district, yay, the Helix Water District, City of El Cajon, and County of San Diego. Next slide, please. The bacteria TMDLs, I mentioned them a few moments ago, especially with regard to stormwater. The board has adopted 2 TMDLs in 2008 and 2010 for bacterial indicators. The science has advanced significantly in the interim, and the board will be reviewing and updating these coming soon. The board is already engaged in a surfer health study, a cost-benefit study, and an evaluation of potential alternative objectives like HF183, a genetic marker for bacterial indicators associated with human fecal waste. It's been a priority of ours since 2014 to update the basin plan and include these TMDL revisions, and we anticipate this being taken up with the next review and being completed by 2028. We will combine the bacterial indicators into one and update them with the latest science. That will focus on human sources of fecal contamination. Sadly, actually a very significant source in stormwater days. And it will incorporate the findings of the investigative order the board issued on the San Diego River to identify human sources and conveyances of fecal waste. There on the slide, we've identified the 3 key major categories of human sources. The news is troubling and daunting. Sewage collection system exfiltration, the largest contribution of fecal waste in our watersheds to receiving waters like the San Diego River or Forester Creek, is the dominant. On-site waste treatment systems, vastly underestimated, but we've now shown that they are a very significant source, even in an urbanized watershed like Lower San Diego River. And of course, sanitary sewer overflows. The interesting story on sanitary sewer overflows is that although the number of sewer overflows has decreased, with atmospheric rivers, the volumes have increased. And we now see how very vulnerable those collection systems are to inflow and infiltration and being overwhelmed in atmospheric river events associated with climate change. Climate change is real, and the result is, unfortunately, more sewage into the rivers and streams and bays and estuaries, and until we better harden and better manage that system for the future we face, rather than assuming that the same assumptions for engineering of the last 50 years still apply. Next slide. Nutrients in agriculture. We may not have the largest farms in the state, but we have a lot of them, about 3,000. And they do contribute a significant amount of nutrients as well as pesticides and insecticides that affect biological integrity. We're addressing those in 2 key ways. We're developing an advanced restoration plan for nutrients for the Santa Margarita River. If successful, we will copy it in the San Luis Rey and San Diego River watersheds where we have significant agriculture. And as you can see there on the slide on the right, we have a lot of nutrients in the Santa Margarita River. It is significantly impaired for that issue. But when they range from open field agriculture, vineyards, and also nurseries that discharge wastewater to several streams contributing to the Santa Margarita River. The several agencies in stormwater have already been working with us And we'll be bringing in the Santa Margarita Irrigated Lands Group and the Farm Bureau into that advanced restoration plan to assign loadings to reduce the nutrients to the receiving waters, including the Santa Margarita River. We plan to adopt that advanced restoration plan in 2026, and then we will update the San Diego region waste discharge requirements for irrigated lands, incorporating source reduction for nutrients from those advanced restoration plans, enhanced monitoring and assessment. We plan to adopt that in late 2026 or early 2027. The regional board has had a lot of success with TMDL alternatives like advanced restoration plans. The Santa Margarita estuary has already been restored to healthy conditions. The Loma Alta Slough, Famosa Slough has also been restored, and we're working right now on Las Penasquitas Lagoon, restoring that one in the case of Las Penasquitas, an actual TMDL for habitat conversion from freshwater marsh to saltwater marsh. So we found value in the collaborative approach and getting real results in shorter periods of time. But in the event that the advanced restoration plan approach is not successful for Santa Margarita, we'll be fully prepared to switch it over to an aggressive TMDL to reduce those nutrient loadings and restore the beneficial uses for that river. Next slide, and I believe it's my last. I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have regarding our practical vision or the key work areas that the board has ahead of it for a very busy and ambitious year. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you to the executive officers and vice chair here for the updates. We are running a bit late here at this point, so we're going to hold questions and please direct them directly to the executive officers. And thank you again for the updates here from the regions. Really appreciate the incredible leadership and good work that continues to go on. So thank you all. All right. We'll now get to our last item and a very exciting one for me here. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this work and item. As you all know, the human right to water was passed in the state of California in 2012. And since then have had a real robust and focused now programs and authorities around drinking water. But the human right to water isn't just around drinking water, it's about the right to sanitation as well. And I'm really proud and glad to be able to have this panel, to be able to highlight the work that's gone on to develop a wastewater needs assessment. What we found on the drinking water side was data and understanding the scale and scope of the challenge is incredibly important at the start to be able to start to get to solutions. And so want to kick things off to Annalisa Quijara to talk about the wastewater needs assessment that we're now doing that again is informed by the strategies that we have on drinking water and importantly has a real critical regionalization component to this all. So without further ado, thank you, Annalisa, and panel here for being with us.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. Good afternoon, WQCC members. I'm Annalisa Quijara. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director in the Division of Water Quality, overseeing our groundwater programs. And so I just want to say that the team and I are honored to be here today to share the work that we're doing for human right to sanitation in California. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a little bit of stage setting for this presentation with the Human Right to Water Act in California, passed in 2012, and it was the first of its kind in the nation. So this was born out of the relentless advocacy from environmental advocacy communities across the state. And what it really did was it challenged the state to affirm its recognition of this problem where communities do not have access to safe and affordable drinking water and sanitation, and to address this issue. Next slide, please. So the team with me today is really excited to share the work that we're doing in the human right to sanitation space. They work in various groundwater programs here at the water boards, including our waste discharges to land, or WDRs, implementation of the water board's on-site wastewater treatment system policy, or OTS, and supporting septic to sewer connection opportunities working with the regional boards. And so we have Stephanie Torres, who's an engineering geologist in our waste discharge requirements program, Danya Jimerson, who is our senior water resources control engineer specialist, working on wastewater needs assessment and septic to sewer work. And then our leader of this section, Erica Calve, she is our groundwater protection section manager. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a quick overview of our presentation outline. Stephanie is going to begin by presenting our current legislative authorities for septic to sewer connections, and then most recently for wastewater administration designation. And she'll also provide some information on a recent sewer system administrator process for the community of East Arosi in the Central Valley. And then Danya will cover a larger effort associated with our wastewater needs assessment that we're conducting statewide. And then Erica is going to close out the discussion with how the wastewater needs assessment informs a larger vision and strategy for advancing our work for the human right to sanitation. Next slide, please. So this roadmap hits some of the key pieces our team will cover today, as I mentioned in the last slide. And then we see that this really started, as I mentioned, with the human right to water, which was the catalyst for the state's drinking water needs assessment and the SAFER program. And the work that we're doing are on the heels of this effort. We're learning and coordinating with our SAFER team as well. And then I also want to make sure to just acknowledge the State Water Board's racial equity resolution that was adopted in 2021, and I would say is our North Star for the work that we're doing in this space. And then at this point, I'll pass it to Stephanie Torres to share the work we're currently implementing with our team for Senate Bill 1215, as well as Assembly Bill 805. Those are the two boxes with the sharp corners on this slide. And most importantly, though, I do want to acknowledge that this work is successful in terms of implementation because we're working alongside the regional boards as well. And that's really important for us to share, and a thank you to the regions. All right. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Annalisa, and good afternoon again, board members, executives, and committee members, and graciously delaying your lunch to listen to our presentation. Next slide, please. So to start off, I get the privilege to just share progress that our California legislation has provided our wastewater programs, starting with Senate Bill 1215. Which was signed into effect in 2018 and established authority to create our wastewater consolidation program. It does provide us a framework and funding for septic to sewer and consolidation projects for especially inadequate on-site sewage treatment systems. And the authority that is granted to the water boards provides authority to our regional water boards to really encourage and if needed, have mandatory consolidation to address some of these inadequacies and connecting them to existing sewer systems. And it also provides some avenues for funding eligibility. And this is important for the receiving sewer systems that as they're working in partnership with the disadvantaged communities, that they become eligible to receive this funding. Next slide, please. Just to review the wastewater consolidation program and its goals, it has two primary goals. The first one is to reduce nitrate impacts in drinking water supply, as well as, again, incentivizing the sewer service connections. And the criteria and coverage that this program includes are the fact that it has to have inadequate on-site sewage treatment systems. It serves a disadvantaged community or a severely disadvantaged community where the median house, per the median household income, and the distance to the wastewater treatment facility is within 3 miles. Next slide, please. Continuing with providing just the progress that California legislation has provided us, we also have Assembly Bill 805, which was signed into effect in 2024, so very recent. And it established this ability to have sewer system administrators. And just to review some of the goals of that is to, again, service disadvantaged communities' needs for sewer service, and providing technical and managerial resources for the success of that, as well as potentially paving new pathways to address these failing systems. Next slide, please. So the sewer system administrators that are established by Assembly Bill 805, the first is the criteria or coverage that's included, which again includes those disadvantaged communities, inadequate sewer systems, and especially those that have demonstrating failures. And that includes a history of failures due to technical, managerial, operational deficiencies or gaps. And the Water Board's authority under Assembly Bill 805 is administered through the Division of Financial Assistance and the Division of Water Quality, which is why we're here today, in providing us the authority to appoint an administrator and designate inadequate sewer systems. The funding for these administrators and for the SWRCB project, which was mentioned and we'll go into further, is currently being funded through allocations from the State Water Pollution Cleanup and Abatement Fund. And this is eligible until December 31st of 2029. So there is a sunset date for this. And so we're really going to be focusing on SWRCB as being this sort of forefront and pilot project to really gain some knowledge and learn how to continue to build upon the mechanisms of what is laid out by Assembly Bill 805. Currently, the funds being utilized are funding the sewer system administrators to help provide adequate sewer service, and technical assistance is available with the availability of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Funds are also being utilized to have community engagement where feasibility plans and technical scoping will be conducted, and community engagement plans and post-administrator plans will be developed by the administrator and continue to have that ongoing public engagement in order for those plans to really fulfill the needs of these communities. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the fun story of how we got here. The bullets start with September 2024, but I do want to take this moment to really acknowledge that this has been ongoing for a long time. There was a lot of pre-work done by our community advocates with Community Water Center and a lot of other people who really raised their voice to speak on behalf of the needs of this community, which represents, honestly, a lot of communities in California. And so it's just really exciting that in September 2024, due to these community voices and impacts, Governor Newsom went down to SWRCB as well as Chair Esquivel and local council members and representatives to be there for the signing, to sort of have this promise and fulfillment that we're going to get this solution for this community and really improve, again, the sewer services for the disadvantaged community here in SWRCB. In January of 2025, the State Water Board, under Assembly Bill 805, the State Water Board was directed to update the Division of Financial Assistance Administrator Policy Handbook to include the criteria for designating an inadequate sewer system, as well as how we identify an appropriate sewer system administrator. And very soon after, this has been a very fast-paced project. In February 2025, the Water Board issued a notification letter to SWRCB Community Sewer District, who had been identified as not providing adequate sewer service to this community. And I have an update that the date of March 18th was the date that SWRCB Community Sewer District had to respond to its designation and the proposal of having an administrator appointed over them. And there was no contest on that. So it was really good to hear things just continuing to move forward. Next slide, please. The next stage was just recently in April, we hosted a public meeting within the community of East WQCC. And as you can see from the photo, we had a lot of great people show up in public engagement. We received oral comments. We reviewed what the notification letter was that we sent and what it means to identify East WQCC Community Sewer District as a designated sewer system and this administrator process and next steps. So, and that does include that, or I will say that the feedback during this meeting was all positive, including East WQCC Community Sewer District, who was there, Tulare County was there, who is our proposed administrator for this project, the Community Water Center nonprofit who's been advocating and helping advocate for this community, as well as the community members were all present, and they all shared that consensus together. After the now that the public meeting is done, the next step is for Division of Water Quality to develop a water quality order and resolution of findings, which will be signed into effect by Eric Oppenheimer, our executive director, and that is to speed this process along as fast as possible, which is also feedback that we receive from the community is, when is this going to happen? When will this take place? So after the appointment in these yellow boxes, the administrator again will establish those plans, feasibility plans, and community engagement plans, and have that ongoing community engagement discourse. And finally, for those green boxes, the whole goal is to, again, get adequate sewer service to this disadvantaged community and have a transition plan for the administrator due to their completion and success. I do want to wrap up this slide with saying that a huge thank you to the staff, the seniors, the executives that really have lifted this project off the ground with as fast as it's gone. That includes the Division of Financial Assistance, everyone here at DWQ, the Division of Drinking Water who started this on the drinking water side, Region 5 Fresno, who was a great asset to that public meeting. We could not have gotten it off the ground without them, and the Office of Chief Counsel, of course. And I do want to also acknowledge a huge thank you to the community of East WQCC, because currently in this time where not everyone is always willing to provide voice to government entities, and especially for them with the local governance not fulfilling their duties and kind of failing on the community's behalf, it was just really great to have them welcome us and to be so communicative with us during that public meeting. And I just really appreciate everyone's assistance on that. And again, the great part of this project is it's laying mechanisms and foundations to provide assistance and identify these communities. And as part of that work in identifying these communities, I kick it off to my partner, Danya Jemison.
Thanks, Stephanie. Next slide, please. So good afternoon, members of the WQCC committee. I am Danya Jimerson. And next slide, please. So over the next few slides, I will walk you through the wastewater needs assessment goals, phases, and completed and upcoming milestones. My background, including over 15 years at the Central Valley Regional Board, where I focus on wastewater consolidation and MPDS permitting, has helped me tremendously to contribute to these efforts as part of the wastewater needs assessment team at the State Water Board. So thanks, Patrick, for that wonderful experience and all your support. Next slide, please. So in 2022, a resolution was adopted to authorize the executive director to enter into a multi-year contract with a total of $4 million for the statewide wastewater needs assessment. And UCLA is the lead investigator in this contract, and they subcontracted 4 other universities to do some of the more specific tasks. Next slides, please. So the long-term goal is to determine and calculate the number of inadequate and at-risk systems using a transparent and systematic and replicable approach. This approach mirrors very much what was done by the Division of Drinking Water through the Drinking Water Needs Assessment for the failing human right to water drinking water systems and the current list. Of course, for the wastewater needs assessment, this analysis is much more challenging because we are dealing with 3 different types of systems. This requires developing inadequacy and risk criteria for each one of them, as well as tracking compliance and enforcement reporting, which varies significantly for the 3 different types of permit types, and to some extent across the regions, as you can imagine. So, and also, unlike SAFER, for the drinking water needs assessment, which was set in motion by Senate Bill 200, with dedicated funding to support the human right to water goals, the wastewater needs assessment has no legislative funding mechanism. So that's a big, big difference. And next slide, please. So in terms of the overarching project goals, the main goal is to support the Water Board's vision of clean, safe, affordable for all uses in California by identifying sanitation and wastewater compliance problems, proposing potential solutions to improve these problems, and identifying further actions to ensure ongoing improvements beyond the contract date of 2027. Next slide, please. So the project was divided in 2 phases. This is a very busy slide. Forgive me, I know there are some rules. Patrick is looking at me. But it tells a very good story. So in the right-hand side, we have a flow diagram that kind of goes through all the different tasks that phase 1 and phase 2 has been incorporated in. So phase 1 started actually in 2023 and is almost completed. And the team has scheduled the submittal of phase 1 report in June of 2025. And the main goal of this phase is to evaluate the baseline situation of wastewater infrastructure and services across the state and identify also data gaps due to many different aspects, CWICs being one of them, developed a roadmap for data collection and risk solutions framework. And phase 2 will technically start in September of 2025, but the project team has been really working super hard, and some of these tasks they already have completed and started earlier on. So the goal of phase 2 is mostly to support the publication of a working list and mapping tools of systems of concerns, and also analysis of needs and for costs and solutions across system types using all the methodologies that were identified in phase 1. So, and also in this slide, I am listing all the advisory group meetings, which have nicely kind of correlate to each one of the tasks. So the teams have managed to present a lot of information in these quarterly advisory group meetings that align with each one of the tasks in phase 1. Next slide, please. So in terms of the completed and upcoming milestones, I would like to emphasize these 5 tasks, beginning with the wastewater systems information gather. Next slide, please. So the original wastewater needs assessment data request was initiated by the Division of Water Quality Deputy Director in November of 2023. This was followed by individual meetings held with each one of the 9 regional boards during January and February of 2024, and continue with ongoing coordination and collaboration with the regional boards throughout the entire 2024, for which we are very, very thankful, as Annalisa pointed out, to all the regional water boards and the time invested in validating and identifying all these data gaps for this data gathering process. And we finalized this milestone with sharing a working facilities list with all the regional water boards in February of this year. Next slide, please. So the wastewater needs assessment team is facilitating and managing the advisory group members' meetings. And the advisory group was not part of the initial scope of the wastewater needs assessment, but UCLA recommended the formation of the advisory group to obtain a more diverse engagement outside of the wastewater needs assessment team and the water boards. So the advisory group kickoff hybrid meeting was held in July of 2024 at the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board in the Rancho Cordova office, and was followed by 3 additional meetings. So the advisory group member selection is representative of a very diverse number of organizations across California, and they volunteered to be part of this effort. And as you can see in this picture, we have a few faces that you are probably very familiar with. We have Debbie Mackey, who is our executive officer from the Central Valley Clean Water Association, representing all the wastewater treatment facilities within the Central Valley. We also have Jasmine Diaz, for example. She's a program manager at the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, or RCSC. And RCSC is one of the 2 main technical assistance providers that have a contract with DFA. But also we have community representatives, and so it's a very diverse group. Next, please. So the next 2 advisory group meetings are scheduled in July and October of this year. And for those interested in reviewing what the wastewater needs assessment team has presented so far, which offers, by the way, a very comprehensive overview of what all the key milestones of phase 1, you can visit the wastewater needs assessment website to access all the past advisory group meetings materials, such as the project scope and milestones, presentations, executive summaries, meeting recordings, and much more information. Next, please. The next milestone in progress is the baseline assessment survey. And the main purpose of this survey was to gather information on a range number of wastewater sanitation issues in communities, and to understand baseline needs and conditions outside of the conventional sources, such as the water boards. So these parts 1 and 2 of this baseline assessment survey has been completed. Part 1 was basically the actual survey to collect information on sanitation issues and the needs of these communities. The survey was issued to approximately 166 people, representing government agencies, academia, private consultants, and so forth. And part 2 was actually mapping all of those identified communities into a more localized process and with certain priorities. And part 3, which is the field campaign and is currently in progress, consists of site visits to these communities identified by the survey to provide a little bit more context and to the survey and document firsthand of what are the known issues. Next, please. So the inadequacy and assessment is based on mostly violations and enforcement order data to determine if a system is currently inadequate, or in other words, out of compliance with their respective permit. The risk assessment aims to identify systems at risk or potentially at risk of becoming inadequate within the future. So these are systems that are not currently inadequate, but given their risk in one or more of the risk criteria identified by the team, whether those are socioeconomics, operational, environmental, public health, they could become inadequate in the future. Next, please. So the solutions and cost assessment framework task is also in progress, and the main goal is to establish a method to identify potential solutions and associate costs for facilities that are determined to be inadequate. So, and also to identify opportunities for on-site wastewater treatment systems to connect to sewer or communities facilities and estimate their potential cost. And this cost analysis is going to include capital costs in terms of construction, equipment, design, permitting, and so forth, and also operations and maintenance. And all of this analysis will be done using present value computations. And finally, next, please. This is a general overview of how all the previous pieces that I mentioned and completed tasks are interconnected for both wastewater treatment systems and collection systems, and also on-site systems. So in the case of the wastewater treatment and collection systems, as I mentioned previously, the wastewater needs assessment team began with initial data gathering from CWICs and validation by the regional water boards. Next, they develop inadequacy and risk criteria for MPDS, WDRs, and sanitary sewer systems facilities, bringing us to the current stage, which is creating a framework for identifying solutions and assessing costs for these inadequate facilities. And some of example solutions, including, for example, connecting these on-site wastewater treatment systems to existing sewer systems, such as the case of SWRCB, or forming a community cluster for those communities located too far from the nearest sewer connection. So these results will provide a high-level insights to support state water board planning efforts and inform local decisions-making, especially in communities seeking reliable sanitation and infrastructure solutions. And this set the stage perfectly for Erica Calve to share the wastewater needs assessment long-term vision for regional and local solutions.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. And yeah, thank you so much for helping set that up. And thank you for all sticking around and hearing us through the tail end of the presentation today. So yeah, I'll be sharing a little bit about how we're starting to think of our vision and strategy for advancing the human right to sanitation based on all the experience that we've been gaining to date and what we're learning through the wastewater needs assessment. So next slide. So first, we want to just acknowledge and express our appreciation for all of the advocacy that's gone into just making this this awareness that there are people and communities in California that do not have access to safe and reliable sanitation. And that awareness is becoming very real to us. And as we learn and see firsthand what that looks like and what that means to people in their day-to-day lives, it's really moving us to take action. And so it's great to get to be here today and share with you kind of where we are today and just and the fact that, you know, we do continue to need support to really address this issue throughout the state. Next slide. And, you know, we're in a stage now where we've had a couple years and some experience that we're getting under our belt. And we're able to take those pieces and start to put them together and shape, you know, a more comprehensive understanding of how could we approach this problem. So we have the great work of the wastewater needs assessment. That's going to be a key part of how we how we start to envision where to go next, because it'll help us identify those issues and potential solutions. But we also have the experience from the regional water boards and learning from the implementation of SB 1215 and some of the challenges there, and trying to kind of identify those and turn those challenges into opportunities. SB or AB 805, of course, is a very recent kind of opportunity for the water boards to take action. And again, it's just a great opportunity to work with communities and understand, what kind of variety of issues are really impacting these communities that are not having access to clean and safe sanitation. We also have the State Water Board oversees the on-site wastewater treatment system policy through our waste discharge requirements program. And so we absolutely are going to be able to draw on some experience there with regard to, what our adequate systems look like when we're talking about on-site wastewater systems. And our WDRs and NPDES programs both have the opportunity to collect the type of information we need to be able to implement solutions faster. So that's a big part of what we're looking at as we start to kind of, put these pieces together and try to develop a statewide strategy for the human right to sanitation. Next slide. And as we move forward, we're really recognizing that there's a need for some consistent terminology in this, in our discussions. We want to have clear and concise definitions that we're working with, so that we can have, we all leave the same meetings with the same understanding. And so there's in the water space, there's a lot of different terms that can be used interchangeably, sometimes between the different types of water matrices that we work with. So you can have drinking water, you have wastewater, and you have stormwater, and you might have a term that's actually used in all three spaces, but in the context of that particular topic, it has a slightly different meaning. And so we want to really acknowledge and honor that there's some differences and start to kind of iron out those differences so that we have clear and concise communication that can help support productive conversations that help advance to solutions faster. So I'll take the next slide. And so together, with the clear and consistent terminology and all the great work and critical thinking that's being led by Danya, by Stephanie, by our partners at the regional water boards, by the wastewater needs assessment team at large, and many others that support the work that's been described so far, we are starting to talk about the bigger picture and vision for the future, and how to be strategic in our approach to addressing these various types of sanitation needs that we face. We plan to take a holistic approach to solutions and regionalization and optimize resources as much as possible to address the complex needs of the areas that are impacted. We need clear and consistent terminology. We need to integrate the findings of the wastewater needs assessment and the water board's experience. And one of the huge findings we are already aware of is the need for data and information that is accessible and usable. And so one of the things that, for our strategy will be to really try to make sure that we have the data collection and data management systems in place to make that information readily available, so that when we become aware of an issue or a need, we're able to act swiftly. And I guess, all of this work we plan to do as we kind of look at the vision and the mission for us with regards to addressing these needs is to take the information that we get through the community engagement and outreach opportunities that are presented to us and listen and hear what those challenges are, what those constraints are, and turn those constraints into opportunities as much as possible. So taking everything that's been built to date and use it to provide high-level insights to support the water board's statewide planning efforts and help inform discussions that we know need to take place and help communities that are seeking reliable sanitation and infrastructure solutions. Next slide. So, in closing, we can just share with you that we only have 2 legislative bills available today to address sanitation needs. Both have specific constraints and applications and limited funding. And so that's a real challenge for us moving forward, recognizing that this is a bigger problem than probably most would be aware. You can see from the pictures on the slide what it looks like to have inadequate sanitation. These were collected recently through the wastewater needs assessment efforts. And I think, you know, for many of us, when you look at this, I know for me, it's really kind of registers how real and immediate the need is. And yeah, so it's emotive, and I apologize because we want to make sure that we're ready, you know, that we have the needs assessment will be completed in 2027, but we can be working on this now and doing as much as possible to advance the work in this space. Ideally expand the opportunities that we have at the water boards and, you know, through our partnerships to the broader needs of the state. There are more types of failing sanitation systems than the ones that we have authority to address at this time. And so it's a great opportunity to be here today and share that with this, you know, very influential group of individuals who can hopefully help us, you know, help support us as we kind of move forward and get our strategy in place and hopefully be able to put this, move as quickly as possible on this issue. And with that, next slide. We just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for having us here today. Thank you for listening. And if you have any detailed questions, I highly recommend you reach out to Danya and Stephanie. They are definitely our experts in this arena. And but also we have a lot of great information available on our websites.
Well, the thanks is all ours. Please join me in thanking Annalisa, Stephanie, Danya, and Erica. Your leadership here is just really felt. Thank you. This is such an unacknowledged and often unseen challenge here within the state. And so elevating this, seeing communities and their challenges for the first time in many ways around sanitation, it takes a different part of you. And I just want to thank that human side and just your leadership and passion in all of this. As you heard, this doesn't have the funding and authorities that we have on the drinking water side. And so this really is the collective leadership of the regional boards and the state board and everyone and communities importantly impacted coming together and saying, we need to figure this out. So incredible thanks for your leadership in all this. Questions? We don't have questions or comments on the platform. And so would take question and comment from folks here in the room. Norma.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend you all for a great presentation. A lot of it is really eye-opening for me as well in terms of the extent of the problem. But I was wondering too that once you've developed this framework and identified the priorities in all of the areas, is there an expectation that you are going to hand this down, the information to the regional boards to assist with the implementation so that there is more effort? And perhaps regional boards could reach out to involve NGOs, community leaders, et cetera, to gain momentum on this. And so I just wanted to know what your long-term plan was.
Yeah, it's both. I think, yes, a lot of the voices being uplifted at the regions would be helpful, and the information that's collected would be, very informational in those discussions at the regional level. We're also hoping that it may spur some investments, either federally or statewide, similar to the drinking water side. And then also, as Erica was mentioning, there may be some, legislative solutions that could be discussed in terms of broadening the authorities that we have currently that we're working with.
Yeah, because I just want to emphasize too, with something like this, there could be an opportunity to involve local foundations for funding as well. And so I think they would be very interested in this.
Thank you, Norma. Other questions, comments from folks? Please.
Christina Shoup, AEO for the Fresno office. I just want to speak to this because this is one of the other disadvantaged communities in our area. And I was actually boots on the ground with one of our investigators early on in identifying the issues in East Arosi. And I want to commend the State Water Board staff. I know we sent folks out to your meeting. That was our SSM1, Michelle, in one of the photos. But it really has been a partnership from day to day. And we started out with the investigations. They have picked up the ball and really run with it after SB 805 passed. And I expect that collaboration will continue because we do need to identify funding sources. And this wastewater needs assessment project is really ground zero for doing that.
Here. Thank you for that. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Jake McKenzie, just a couple of observations as I was listening to this presentation and as I've had an experience now for over a year on the regional board, the question of resources. When I first started working for EPA in 1972, the construction grants program was underway. Construction grants program helped to build the sub-regional treatment plant in Santa Rosa, which was a major departure at that time, but required major capital investment. And that went on through the life of that program. Unfortunately, I do not have great optimism at this moment about the resurrection of federal resources in the same way as happened 50 years ago. The other comment I'd just make is that in terms of matching funds from cities, from jurisdictions, having spent 24 years in a city council, and knowing what's happening with municipal finances at this moment, again, to me, there's a crisis in funding both nationally and locally that's coming up. And I know that nobody was allowed to talk about the May revise that's coming up in this month from the governor. And again, I wish I could be leaving this meeting with greater optimism about funding resources, but to me, there's a reality at the moment. Matching funds from cities like Santa Rosa, they have an operating deficit at this time of over $20 million. Anyway, sorry to be leaving the meeting on such a down note, but I just was reflecting on this last 50 years of funding and where we find ourselves now.
No need to apologize in the least. I'll say that, it is something that we're very much concerned about. And to your point, the last 50 years of progress in access to sanitation, in access to drinking water, was really spurred by a lot of federal investment. And, there's been that pivot to the state revolving funds and kind of having a different model, not the direct support from the feds that expanded access to what we have in many communities today. So it is something that, we're going to have to continue to figure out. And that's where the needs assessment, provides the data and the basis for a discussion and real evidence around a challenge. And so I hope that this helps to inform the legislatures, to inform leadership out there that this isn't something that's kind of one and done. If we're going to maintain access and continue to get to communities that still haven't had access to sanitation or drinking water, we need sustained funding because it's not a problem that we solve, it's a problem we manage ultimately, and really concerned that we may go in the wrong direction. And by the time we do go in the wrong direction, as we saw from the Clean Water Act and passage of Clean Air Act and all these things, we don't want it to get to a point where it's a crisis and we need to then come back to it because we should have already learned that lesson. So I appreciate that comment.
Well, I'll certainly be happy to talk to our local legislators if I'm allowed to.
Make sure you get authorization. No, it was a good discussion. Laurel, please. Board Member Fires.
Thank you. And I know everyone's eager to get to lunch. It's been a great
and a lot of time, but I am so thankful to this team and to all the regional boards that have worked with this team already and will continue to work. I just wanted to recognize, where we are in this in terms of what we don't know and what we don't have data on. And really, I think this is the first step in identifying how much is hidden. I mean, we think of wastewater, people don't like to think about it, right? In general, we all know this from just our regulatory role. But in particular, even within our regulatory programs, East WQCC was one that wasn't even enrolled in a regulatory program. So the effort that Office of Enforcement is doing with the regions around looking for under enrollment is if we can't find and see and give recognition to folks, then we can't help address this issue and we're not going to be successful. And that's sort of the very first step of where we're at, is being able to see people and be able to identify needs. And, I think as the chair said, all of us know there's never enough resources for anything. And forecast is not looking good, but it is something that we just have to manage through. And it's about identifying where there's needs, what solutions are, and continuing to push forward on what we do have control of. And this is just such an example of not just retreating from really some of our biggest challenges, but actually proactively identifying. I always think of it as like picking up the rock and looking at the things that maybe have been hidden for so long and not being afraid of that, but sort of having the courage and partnership and respect to be able to do that. So I'm so grateful. I'm so excited about this effort, and I'm so excited about our ability to work with the regions on it and the implementation and creative solutions, even around funding. So, thanks.
Hear, hear. Jean-Pierre.
And to expand on that a little bit, Jean-Pierre from these coastal area. I think there's a need to share more of that information to the public at large. So, a public campaign to highlight this, I think would help a lot, because people don't know what they don't know. And I'm sure my colleagues have experienced this many times too. Sometimes I'll tell people, we have to provide bottled water to schools. Really? I never heard of that. I mean, we often assume that what we know has been knowledge also to the public at large, but that's not the case. And earlier, some of you spoke about foundations and assistance also from foundations. If we look at the United States, or California more specifically, the amount of 501c3 is a very large number. And one of the things that as a country compared to other countries, we're very generous people. If you look at the amount of money that people donate to various organizations, it's very significant, very impressive compared to other countries. You take the European model, it is assumed, we pay enough tax, so it's up to the government to deal with it. In our country, in addition to that, we are a generous country as a whole to look at the positive aspects. So as we're focusing right now, primarily our conversation with federal funding and state funding, I think it behooves to look at, NGOs, nonprofit groups, and they would be, I'm sure, willing to help. I know some organizations personally who donate tens of thousands of dollars to help other countries. It's a very laudable thing to do, but they're not aware necessarily that we do have these issues right in our backyard. So that's basically what I'm suggesting.
let's communicate more. Let's use our resource articles in, major newspapers and news media. And I think you might get some additional traction from that. Thank you. And again, appreciate all your great work.
Hey, thank you. We are going to go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to say thank you all so much. Board Member Firestone covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover. I just want to say I am so excited for this effort. This is something I've been working on for most of my career over the past 25 years. Is something I excitedly jumped in right out of college and am beyond excited that this effort is occurring. This is a small and mighty team that has a huge lift, and there's so many areas to dive into, as you have all seen. Want to not only thank this team, want to thank Christina Shoup and also Ben Letton, who are their executive sponsors. Dave Gibson did sort of lead into some of the data gaps, the challenges that we face as we go into this. Just the data isn't as there. Board Member Firestone said, these are something you don't want to talk about. Don't ask me why I decided to go work at a wastewater treatment plant and want to talk about wastewater all the time. I can go on forever if you know me, so I won't. So, this team has been reaching out and working with staff at the regions. All of you, if you know of additional information, if there's anything that you can think of, please reach out to the team. This is really a data collecting effort and to really know more about what's going on out within the regions, because we are a large state, lots going on, and we don't know what we don't know. This is an area that has largely just, the infrastructure was put in 50 plus years ago, and it was left there. Many times I talk to residents and it's like, well, why would I want to get involved with this project? I don't have a sewer bill. It's like, oh, well, that's a problem, because even if you're on septic, you should still have a bill. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of education to be done. And as we continue to move forward, we are all partners in this effort throughout the state for that work, for that education. And if you can't tell, I am super excited about wastewater. So I'm always also happy to come and talk and to, I would volunteer them, but I think some would be mad if I did that. So I'll volunteer myself to come and talk about the effort and how you all and how the areas can help and what we all need. So with that, Joaquin, I was just saying, we're going to close it on out and want to just I was thanking the team. Thank you all.
Thank you, board member. Great way to close. Let's thank our sanitation nerds. Truly, it's such an exciting project. So really appreciate it. Sorry, the day's time got a little out of hand for us. We're here at the end. Thank you so much for an incredible day and a half together here. This is a special time, yearly event that we have. And so just so you know, a couple of closing things. On the Slido app, there are some questions there just about topics that you would all like to see that we didn't get to cover, and any suggestions and feedback that you have for this meeting. We're always in perpetual learning mode. It's hard to try to get in as much as we can over the 2.5 days, have conversation as well, and accommodate what are a wide range of topics that are ongoing in your region. So can't thank you enough for making the trip out here, creating this space and this time. Privileged to be able to do my part. Just thank you. And with that, this concludes and adjourns WQCC for 2025. We'll see you all here in a year. And lastly, please do take as much food as you can. Take snacks for the road. Take it all. I don't want to gain weight.